Everything starts with a tale of a hero who, like others, destroys everything that causes suffering and seeks to heal the pain of those who need to be saved. However, every hero awaits a premature end, whether through the betrayal of someone he trusted or by falling into an enemy's trap. Once, one of these heroes was so powerful that people avoided him out of fear, that he continued to save those in need at the cost of his own heart. When the world was saved on the brink of death, he prayed to the gods to grant a wish in his next reincarnation. Next, a boy named Alan wakes up with his brother screaming his name because their father is calling. This brother despises Alan for being lazy and undeserving of the comfort he has, wishing their father would be stricter with the older brother's behavior. But he believes today is the day everything will change. So Alan arrives in the throne room where his father mentions that the boy was born into the Westphalt ducal family 15 years ago, yet he never advanced past level 1. And worst of all, at the blessing ceremony held the previous day, Alan received no gift, even though every child in this world receives a gift from the gods. For this reason, Alan's father sees him as a failure who embarrasses the family name, being the heir of the Westphalt family, so he kicks his son out of the house. Outside the gates, Alan celebrates being free from such an unbearable duke after being reincarnated. Now he could follow his own path and seek the inner peace he so desired in his past life. For this, the boy wanders to the borderlands in the east of Westphalt, where he hopes for a peaceful life far from trouble, unlike his previous incarnation where people feared him. On his way to his destination, he finds a good place to rest before continuing his journey, but spots in the distance a knight named Beatrice, who is facing alone some stone dogs. She tears the beasts apart, but they quickly regenerate, leaving her companion, Lise, in danger. Beatrice asks her friend to flee, but Lise doesn't want to leave and abandon the knight alone with these beasts. Watching the scene, Alan recognizes the first princess of the kingdom of Adostella, Lise Adostella, and wonders what princess would be doing in a place like that. Then we're taken to a memory where Lise overhears the guests at a ceremony mocking Alan, the heir of the ducal house of Adostella, calling him a coward, and that Craig is surely devastated for having lost his wife and being left with his failed son. Lise rages against the men, saying Alan is a very decent boy. Faced with this memory, the boy thinks he could prevent harm from happening to the girl who defended him so much. At that moment, Beatrice takes a hard blow and falls to the ground, leaving the princess defenseless. So Alan rushes at great speed toward the danger, where Lise had already accepted death, and finds it strange that all she can think of at that moment is Alan. Because of this, she calls out the boy's name before being attacked by the dogs, and at the same moment, the boy had saved the princess in time, asking her if someone happened to call his name. Lise wants to know how Alan ended up there at that moment, but the boy is busy dealing with the other beasts that are still a threat. So he charges against them and uses his divine eyes, identifying the cores that are the weak points of his enemies. Focusing on this, Alan invokes the end of the world and blossoming of 100 flowers' ability to launch several swords at the targets. With that, the threat had been defeated, but Beatrice was still in danger of losing her life. Alan recognizes Beatrice from ancient times and promises to heal her wounds, and uses a technique from the parallel paradox to completely erase the warrior's wounds, even restoring her armor. Faced with so much power, Lise asks how her friend reached this level, and he tries to hide the fact that he inherited it from a past life, while Beatrice supposes it's a gift from a level that the church itself is unaware of. As the princess buys into this idea, the boy confirms that's the case, getting rid of that for now. Next, he asks why the princess is in a place like this, and she tells him she received a divine revelation a few days ago. It wasn't any precise information, but the princess's gift said she could prevent ill omen if she paid attention to the words spoken. Through this revelation, the two were guided to Clune village on the border, but they were attacked on the way. According to Beatrice, if it weren't for Alan, the two might have been killed. Then the princess returns the question and also wants to know what Alan is doing there, but the boy prefers to talk in a carriage right behind them. Lise comments that it's broken, but Alan rebuilds the carriage using another healing light magic from the parallel paradox. Stewing with Beatrice on the horse's reins, Alan says he was expelled from the Westphalt family and also intends to go to the borders of that domain. He asks if the princess allows it, since a servant with his skills would be very useful for training. Beatrice comments that obviously he would need to be returned, considering the crown's interests, but Princess Lise decides to put her friend ahead of the kingdom, although it makes her unsuitable for royalty. As night falls, the three arrive at a village where everything is too empty and quiet, and Alan doesn't even feel the presence of monsters nearby. Beatrice points out that the team wasn't attacked after Alan joined, and the boy thinks it's because perhaps the monsters are afraid of something and are avoiding the village. However, a little further ahead, they find the villagers gathered in front of a structure from which a girl was expelled by a man. Lise recognizes this girl as the light sent to her as a sign, and her name is Akira. On the other hand, Akira has no idea who the girl speaking to her is, so the princess introduces herself, offended for not being recognized, since she showed the entire palace to the girl and even had lunch with her. Alan wants to know what this light talk is about, so Beatrice explains that it comes from a gift called Valiant, so rare that it's only given to one person in each generation, granting the power of 1,000 warriors to the bearer. In this current generation, the heroine who carries the strongest gift is Akira Kazuragi, and the revelation that Lise received was, become a guide to the light and eliminate the darkness. Soon, the group gathers to quell their hunger, and Akira reveals she was wandering aimlessly until she stumbled upon this village where a child told her she had nearly been sacrificed to the dragon residing in the mountains nearby. Thus, Akira sought details from the village chief, but he warned her not to interfere. Confronted with this, Alan speculates they allow the dragon to stay for protection, as in a small village like this, monster attacks are a matter of life or death, which would explain the abnormal absence of monsters in the region. Akira agrees with the boy's assumption and soon reveals she instructed the girl who was offered as a sacrifice to hide in a cave nearby until everything was resolved. However, now that she's had her fill and there's nothing interesting in this place, Akira decides to slay the dragon once and for all and calls on those who wish to accompany her. Alan considers the possibility that the villagers may not want to rid themselves of the dragon and that killing it could cause a conflict, but Akira promised to help the child, and that's what she's going to do. After the heroine departs, Lise and Beatrice decide to join her, and eventually Alan follows suit because he doesn't want to enjoy peace and tranquility on the frontier while his friends are in danger. Just in front of the mountain where the dragon resides, Akira gathers the group to devise a strategy. She will approach the peak via the main road, while the rest will circle around from behind to surround the creature. Alan questions whether it wouldn't be better for him to go in front instead of Akira, but the heroine refuses his request, sensing that the boy is the type to handle things on his own. Alan downplays it, saying he's being overestimated, but Akira insists that the boy is no ordinary person, leaving everyone looking at him with a question mark. Finally, Akira reveals that she intends to throw down with the boy, but only after defeating the dragon. Then she sets off ahead following her strategy and urges the rest of the people to hurry, or else she'll take down the beast alone. With everyone aware of their roles, the trio scales the mountain slopes, and Alan worries about the princess, but she assures him she knows a thing or two about self-defense. Meanwhile, Beatrice finds it curious that the Westfelds, who pride themselves on their military might, haven't discovered a dragon within their borders. In turn, Alan believes that his old family and this dragon have some kind of connection, and therefore there has been no conflict between them. He goes further, suggesting that perhaps the village of Clume was built precisely for the purpose of offering sacrifices. With this, Beatrice agrees that maintaining an agreement with the dragon would keep the border secure, but Alan believes that is only a consequence of this relationship, and that the real purpose is much worse than that. At this moment, the dragon senses Akira's presence and attacks the heroine, who retaliates by invoking the Sovereign of Lightning. She believes this will do the trick, but the dragon emerges unscathed, mocking the human and questioning if this is some kind of joke. In response to the creature's arrogance, Akira decides not to go easy in this fight. But the dragon points out that innocent people may become victims of this crossfire, turning its head toward the small girl who was offered as a sacrifice. Akira asks how the dragon found this child, and it responds that it let her escape on purpose because its intention was never to devour humans, but to enjoy seeing the despair on their faces because a dragon's life is too long not to kill time with such interesting activities. Therefore, it released the offering just to see what would happen next. Faced with this insolence, Akira fills with hatred and attacks the dragon with a final blow of celestial blue lightning destruction. Convinced she has defeated the enemy, she turns around only to see the monster unharmed and further mocking the heroine's weakness. Then it strikes the girl forcefully, claiming it's ridiculous for someone so useless to call themselves a hero. Immobilized, Akira realizes there is an abyss of power between them, while the dragon fills its mouth with fire. However, as it was about to unleash the final blow, Alan appears and tears off one of its wings. Alan stands in front of Akira to protect her and taunts the dragon, mentioning the arrogance it has shown so far, so the creature angrily advances towards the humans. Alan asks Elise to take care of the heroine and for Beatrice to take the child, then he invokes an ability called Demon Assassin's Sword, causing enormous damage to the enemy. The creature wonders how it can be injured by a mere human with a blunt blade, since it is the Red Dragon King, the living being closest to a god. Alan acknowledges that this monster is on a different level, but watching the battle between him and Akira, he believes he can win with his technique of the end of the world. However, the dragon plays dirty and uses the rest of the group as helpless shields. However, Lise motivates Alan to do what must be done, and in that moment, he remembers that he lost the ability to face people since he began to be called a failure. Still, he sees that Lise awakens a strange courage within him, so he charges at the dragon, who decides to end everyone at once, but the mysterious warrior uses the light, the supreme ability of the end of the world, and as the intense glow of the weapon pierces the creature's armor, the darkness of the sky dissipates along with the Red Dragon King, and its scales fall from the sky like a petal shower. Shortly after, Akira awakens and embraces the child she promised to save, while Alan reflects that saving a princess and helping a hero kill a dragon wasn't the kind of peaceful life he wanted. But when Lise extends her hand to the boy, he realizes that a small detour on the path isn't harmful. The next day, Alan wakes up startled and apologizes for having slept for too long, but Lise reassures the boy, after all, the battle against the Red Dragon King must have been very exhausting. So Alan asks where the others are, and the princess points to the middle of the field, where Akira and Beatrice are facing off in a training duel. Then Lise takes the opportunity to explain her ability to heal people that she demonstrated earlier. However, Alan mentions hearing stories about a miraculous saint who heals any illness or injury at the doorsteps of homes in need, expressing surprise that it's the princess. Nevertheless, to him, whether she's a princess or a miraculous saint, Lise remains just herself. With that said, an atmosphere of affection grows between the two, but Akira shouts for Alan to train with them, disrupting the intimate moment. Sometime later, the adventurers bid farewell to Akira and the little rescued girl. They invited Heroine to join their journey, but she doesn't get along well with carriages, preferring to walk instead. Liza asks if Akira is sure she wants to stay with the child, and she responds that the two have already bonded, and besides, her family no longer exists, so returning her to the same village isn't a good idea. The little girl rejoices at this opportunity to start a new life, while Akira apologizes to Alan for the broken sword, feeling that she should have been the one to kill that dragon instead of leaving everything to the boy. Therefore, Akira feels inadequate and intends to hand over the sacred sword to someone worthy of it, which in this case is Alan. Humbly, Alan responds that he was only able to win with Akira's help, and that to the little girl by her side, Akira is the only hero that matters around there. Thus, the two bid farewell and go their separate ways without the rest of the team. In the late afternoon at the Westphalt family palace, Alan's father informs a mysterious man in a suit that the Red Dragon King was defeated when trying to lure the heroine into an ambush. The man in the suit assumes that she had the help of the saint, so the Duke realizes that there's more to it. Alan's younger brother rages over the dragon's death, lamenting that the clay dogs weren't able to eliminate the princess, promising to send a whole pack next time to avoid the risk of failure again. However, the Duke reminds them that the dragon's death caused a limitation of material, so they can't waste magical life forms. The boy thinks this thriftiness will let the princess escape, but the Duke assures that as long as the targets are within Westphalt lands, opportunities to catch her won't be lacking. However, more importantly, the Duke wants to know if that elf has been found, and the unknown man responds that there's no need to hurry because soon he'll deliver the elf's head to the noble. With the departure of the man in the suit, the Duke rejoices at the opportunity to bury these annoying god's puppets and avenge the Westphalt family. Meanwhile, in the carriage, Alan asks about a friend of Lee's who is a blacksmith, and she explains that this blacksmith lives in a city not far from there called Granholm. Liz would love to ask her friend to make a new sword for Alan. He in turn is surprised to hear about cities on the border, while Beatrice asserts that their friend is a good professional despite there not being many elven blacksmiths. Then Lise apologizes to Alan for her revelation, putting him in this whole situation, and intends to give the sword as a reward. Alan accepts the gift, but asks if the princess shouldn't return to the capital. She explains that she has already informed her father, besides being with Beatrice. As night falls, the group sets up a camp to sleep, and Beatrice offers to light a fire, but Alan uses his power to create fire for everyone, leaving the warriors stunned. Lise is exhausted and ends up falling asleep on her friend's shoulder, and Beatrice teases, saying they're engaged, so there's no problem with that. But Lise makes it clear they're no longer engaged, and she doesn't want to sleep on the boy's lap. Despite her speech, she ends up sleeping on Alan's shoulder, who realizes that this is the first moment of tranquility since he arrived in this world, and remembers that it was also a beautiful moonlit night the first time he met Lise. On that day, she found Alan on a balcony and introduced herself to him, starting a conversation about the beauty of the night. Furthermore, she reveals that she's counting on the boy from now on. After all, they're engaged, and Alan is confused by this news. The next morning, they arrive in Granholm, a place so lively that it didn't seem like a border town, according to Alan. Beatrice explains that travelers and wanderers often pass through this type of city precisely because it's on the border. Soon, they all arrive at the blacksmith's house, but it seems that the elf isn't home. Alan notices that the door is unlocked, so the girls enter and call out for their friend Noelle, while Alan admires the perfection of the craftsmanship of those weapons inside. At that moment, Lee screams upon seeing Noelle unconscious on the floor, but Beatrice assures that it's just the elf's usual heavy sleep. With that, the saint heals her friend, and the bodyguard explains that Noelle doesn't eat, drink, or sleep when she starts making a weapon, and therefore passes out from exhaustion. The princess has already asked her to take it easy with work, but she never listens. At that moment, the blacksmith wakes up and sees her friends whom she hadn't seen in so long, but wants to know who the guy next to them is. So he's introduced as Alan, one of Lisa's guards, who asks the elf to forge a sword for him. However, Noelle has too many orders lined up, so she doesn't have time for that. Lise is frustrated, and Beatrice understands the blacksmith's side, who grumbles that this man already has a sword. Alan shows that the weapon is broken, and the elf feels ashamed for someone so clumsy wanting to wield a weapon made by her. However, upon picking up the sword, she notices that it was used to its limit to break like that, which intrigues the blacksmith to the point of her changing her mind and agreeing to make another blade for the warrior. She asks if Alan wants a sword that surpasses the sacred sword, simply the most powerful weapon she could produce. After all, only a few people are capable of wielding such equipment, and Noelle believes Alan is one of those people. With that said, the boy has no reason to refuse, so Ferreira prepares to start the work by pushing all the visitors out. Alone inside the house, the elf remembers Vanessa, a blacksmith she greatly admired in her childhood, and immediately promises to produce a weapon that will surpass the sacred sword. As she leaves, Lise hopes that Noelle doesn't overdo it with work, and Alan suggests that the group find an inn to stay in while waiting for the sword to be ready. Nearby, a woman reveals herself and intends to report what she's seeing. Soon, she tells the man in the suit that the saint was seen with her bodyguard and another warrior, and the man is surprised because he thought the princess would only be accompanied by Beatrice, so he plans to investigate the matter. Meanwhile, at a nearby inn, Alan asks what they're going to do during these days, and Beatrice recommends that he do what he's always wanted, relax and not worry. However, Lee suggests he visit the Adventurers Guild to sell the items the dragon dropped, and Alan thinks it's a good idea to cover the hotel expenses. With that decided, the girls decide to take a stroll around the city in Alan's absence. With the boy gone, Beatrice questions whether the two of them alone will really be able to handle this matter, but Lee prefers not to involve Alan in it. Shortly after, the warrior finds the guild and shows the dragon scales he looted, and the receptionist is impressed to have such a rare item on the counter. Unsure of what to do, she takes some and rushes to speak to the manager, leaving Alan empty-handed. At that moment, the man in the suit takes advantage of the situation to approach Alan and ask for details about the dragon's scales the boy is carrying. Seeing his lack of manners, the man takes off his hat and introduces himself properly as Horace, along with his friend Mylena, a rare Amazon to be found in these lands. Horace explains that he never tires of hearing adventurers' stories, so he wants to know if Alan obtained these dragon scales alone. In turn, the boy mentions that he had the heroine's help, and Horace becomes intrigued by this conversation, but the attendant returns at that moment, claiming to have assessed the value of the scales. Alan looks back at the mysterious man, but he had disappeared along with his companion. Outside, Horace comments to Mylene that he never imagined that the man accompanying the princess is just a useless person without talent, but the Amazon feels something in that young man that bothers her a lot, although Horace thinks he is not a problem. Days later, the trio returns to Noel's blacksmith hoping the sword is ready, but once again she was passed out on the ground. After being healed, Noel points to the most powerful weapon she could forge, and as Alan wields the blade, he is sure it's a great sword. Noel wants to test the weapon right away, but Liz warns that she won't be healing the elf all the time. Still, the blacksmith chooses to accompany the boy because only by observing the sword will she know if any adjustments are needed. Alan notices the girl's perfectionism and asks why she decided to be a blacksmith. She questions if it's strange for an elf to have this profession, and Alan believes it is because of the characteristics of the race's talent, and that's why dwarves are usually more suited to it. Then Noelle reveals that she was raised by a dwarf and doesn't know where she was born or who her parents are, but only remembers being in an unknown place, wandering aimlessly, until she was rescued by Vanessa. Vanessa was persistent, clumsy, and stubborn. She never wanted to teach Noelle how to make a sword, but she was still an important master for the elf. But instead of finishing the story, Noelle says it doesn't matter and runs away to avoid exposing herself so personally. So Horace takes advantage of the opportunity to appear once again, commenting that you would love to hear more stories like that when they return to the city. Alan notices that there's something strange about this man and this Amazon, but before the conversation evolves, Noel hurries the boy to continue with the sword test. The elf observes Horace and thinks he's someone she knows, but she soon gives up the idea. As they move away, the man in the suit comments to Mylene that probably that boy didn't pry into their affairs, so he asks the Amazon to keep an eye on Alan so he doesn't uncover the secret. Returning to the warrior, he tests the sacred sword, and after defeating some creatures with it, he is satisfied with the blade, so Noelle borrows the weapon and reveals her talent, an ability to see conditions invisible to normal eyes in this type of weapon. So analyzing the angle, speed, and impeccable position with which Alan wields the sword, she is sure that her vision of him was correct as being the ideal user of the sacred sword. Still, she finds it interesting to see how the boy fares against a stronger monster, so she calls him to continue on the path ahead. Venturing deeper into the forest, they arrive at a place where Noelle swears there have always been many monsters, but since it's empty, she supposes they are afraid of Alan's presence. However, the boy is sure it's not fear of him, but of something else nearby. So he casts a spell that disperses the fog, revealing a huge wolf that terrifies Noelle, reminding her that it was this creature that swallowed Vanessa. Faced with this, she stammers in fear until she asks Alan to use the sacred sword and end the wild beast. At this moment, we return to Noelle's past, where she tries to get Vanessa's attention, who is deeply focused on her work. The elf insists she's hungry, visibly irritating Vanessa, who then frowns, hoping to deter the young one. However, hours pass and the blacksmith was still hard at work, while Noelle had managed to scrounge up something to eat. Approaching Vanessa, the elf asks how she manages to use all these different tools, but Vanessa remains silent. Irritated by being ignored, Noelle misbehaves, lifting a huge sword with her hands, but loses balance and falls, knocking over several things on the nearby shelf. Even so, Noelle hadn't gained the attention she sought, so she decides to back off and sit near the dwarf again. Noelle asks what's so great about hammering on a sword all day, especially when it leads to feeling sick from not eating or drinking anything for days. Seeing she won't get what she wants from a distance, the petit one approaches Vanessa, repeatedly calling her dumb for not even knowing how to speak, but even this tactic fails. The next day, Noelle sleeps anywhere in the house while the hammering continues incessantly until suddenly, Vanessa interrupts her work. Proud of the sword she has forged, Vanessa lifts it with a smile while Noelle watches with curiosity. After that, we return to the present moment where Noelle insists that Alan killed a beast, but he says he has no reason to, as the wolf is just sleeping in its corner, away from humans. He asserts he doesn't wish to take on the elf's vengeance, so Noel takes the boy's sword to seek justice herself. However, Alan advises her against it, explaining that the creature Fenrir has a barrier that nullifies any attack below a certain level. This sword, for instance, wouldn't even scratch the monster, and he reminds Noel that she knows this, as she has yet to create a weapon stronger than the sacred sword. With that, Alan leaves the decision in the elf's hands. Upon returning to the lodging, the warrior informs the rest of the group about the giant beast in the border region. He believes someone brought that Fenrir to this territory because the animal was concealed by some kind of magic, and Alan has a hunch about the reason. Before that, he asks if Lise and Beatrice reveal their true purpose, and the girls realize they can't hide anything from him. So Lise explains that about 3 months ago, the famous General Cyril, one of the kingdom's strongest, was murdered. No one knows why, but the assailant took the general's head with him. Many spells were used to try to uncover the motive, but it's still unknown to this day. Suspicions suggest the culprit is a demon, as these beings use magics unknown to humans. But since demons aren't known for killing humans and caring about politics, perhaps he's under someone else's orders. For all these reasons, Lise and Beatrice were investigating this case in this city, and after some thought, Alan believes he has a suspect. Meanwhile, at the border, Mylene wonders who managed to undo the Fenrir's camouflage, as it's not something simple to do. Therefore, she believes she's dealing with a more dangerous enemy than Horus imagines. When she returns to her boss to report her mission, he informs her that he will soon make his move because his time in this city is up, so Mylene must bring the elves and the saints' heads. Seeing the girl seem frightened by the request, Horus questions how a feared Amazon can be so sensitive, and when the magical subordination collar appears on the girl, the man makes it clear he won't accept a no as an answer. Meanwhile, Noel is crafting new weapons and remembers when Alan said that depending on how his sword is refined, maybe one day it can even harm Fenrir. Noel asks the boy to tell her everything he knows about it, and agreeing, Alan asks the elf not to be reckless with what he's about to teach her. Persistent in her goal, Noel is sure that one day she will be able to surpass the sacred sword, but her exhaustion had reached the point of making her fall asleep again. Then a nightmare of the moment when the Fenrir attacked her home occurs, and Noel is trapped under the debris that fell from the ceiling. Vanessa tries to fight the Fenrir, while Horus admits she is a great blacksmith, but that's a problem for him because he doesn't want anyone to be able to produce weapons superior to the sacred swords. At that moment, Vanessa advances against the wolf, but a magical shield he possesses shatters her sword, leaving her at the mercy of the creature. After dealing with Vanessa, the Fenrir rushes toward the elf, but Akira appears and casts a lightning bolt at the monster. As the magic has no effect on him, the heroine advances and cuts him with her sword, forcing Horus to retreat along with the beast. With the enemies fleeing, Noel goes to her master's body to mourn her loss. Akira tries to convince her to tend to her wounds, but Noel questions why the heroine had a sword capable of injuring the wolf, but Vanessa didn't. Soon, the young elf embraces the weapon her master took so long to make and cries copiously in front of her body. At dawn, Noel wakes up feeling strangely light and hearing a noise outside. She thinks it's Lise, but it's Alan, checking if the blacksmith really wasn't overdoing it with work as promised. Then, after a long day's work, the blacksmith finishes another sword and returns with it to the forest where the Fenrir was last seen, apologizing to Alan for using his sword. After a long walk, Noel confronts her arch-rival and raises the blade to pierce the beast, but she hears the sound of the sword and is struck by the elf first. After Noel struggles to her feet, Horus appears and is impressed that the girl wasn't incapacitated by a Fenrir's swipe. Finally, he reveals that he was looking for the elf Noel Leonhardt. The elf asks if the man will kill her, just like he did with Vanessa, and upon hearing that name, Horus scratches his chin and remembers that this elf indeed seemed familiar because she was the one with the dwarf blacksmith. Because of this, Horus believes that the master and apprentice being killed by Fenrir is a twist of fate. But Noel tries to prevent it from happening, yet when she charges at the wolf, he leaps over her and hits her back with his hind paw. With that, Horus wishes to ask one last thing before the elf is devoured. He wants to know if she would serve him because such extraordinary talent as hers would be wasted in Fenrir's stomach. This talent is the Grom Vision, the eyes of the sovereign fairy. There are only 5 known innate gifts in this world, and this is one of them. Nonetheless, Horus promises to reward the blacksmith, just as he does to this day with his subordinate Amazon, because after Horus destroyed her homeland, he took the girl away to serve him. Facing this, Noel responds that she would rather die than serve this man, so he regrets the girl's wrong decision and orders the giant wolf to finish her off, but before the final blow, Alan appears and saves his friend's life. Seeing the young man's capability, Horus confesses that he underestimated his talents, but at the same time believes it was foolish of the young man to abandon his main post to get there because if anything happens to the princess, it will be difficult to reach her in time. By the way, Mylene was already inside Lise and Beatrice's room. However, as she approached Princess Lisa's bed, it was only a tied mattress. In fact, the two were already prepared for this encounter and were waiting hidden for the Amazon's arrival. Returning to Alan, he mocks the enemy's arrogance, for at no moment did he consider Mylene being discovered. Knowing how she operates, the boy placed a barrier that nullifies invisibility around Lise. Alan has been the target of such plans so many times in his past life that he's more than accustomed to them. Horace finds it amusing that the boy mentioned his supposed past life, and he knows that even with Mylene exposed, it doesn't mean Beatrice can defeat her. In the inn room, the two warriors clash for the princess's life, but when Beatrice was about to go all out against her opponent, Lise asks her to stop immediately. With this distraction, the Amazon takes advantage and hits her opponent with her elbow, rendering her unconscious. With this, the path was clear for Mylene to finish off the princess. But instead of completing the job, the Amazon hesitated until Beatrice managed to save her friend in time. Watching the fight from afar, Alan sees that the two won't need any help and informs Horace that his execution attempt failed. Still, Horace believes he is in control of the situation, since Fenrir cannot be harmed without a sacred sword. Therefore, he orders the wolf to destroy the insolent boy, and the beast's imposing presence makes Noelle recall old visions of her trauma and scream for Alan. But the warrior manages to open a hole in the monster's body without major problems, causing Horace to flee at that moment in the face of such a great force. Soon Alan was carrying Noelle back home, taking advantage of the fact that the elf passed out after he healed her. Besides, she had spent the night forging, so sleep was expected. At that moment, Lise comes running towards her friend to see how he is. Fortunately, everyone is fine, but Noelle isn't happy when she wakes up and sees that Alan was carrying her without her permission. The next day, they assess that Mylene has been released from Horace's subordination spell, so she should be able to speak freely. Beatrice thinks it's best to take her to an official trial in the capital, but Lise believes that this girl is not evil, so she wants to find a more peaceful way to resolve the situation. The bodyguard reminds that the Amazon tried to kill the princess, but she responds that it wasn't this girl's intention. Anyway, Lise believes that Mylene has someone from her people waiting for her, but the Amazon explains that her homeland was burned, and she has nothing left, nowhere to go. At that moment, Noelle remembers when she was rescued by Vanessa, and after asking her name, the dwarf blacksmith announces that she will take the elf to her house. Soon, in a moment of empathy, the elf blacksmith cuts the Amazon's bonds and frees her, besides inviting the girl to live in her house. Beatrice argues that this woman may attack Lise at any moment, but Noelle believes otherwise, and if that happens, Mylene will get a good scolding. With that, the Amazon is moved by the support she received from this strange person and starts crying. Beatrice thinks she was too harsh on the girl, but she's only crying tears of joy. Therefore, Alan realizes that today's problem is solved. Then in the middle of the night, he returns alone to the forest and casts a powerful spell. Meanwhile, Horace is far away from the protagonist, certain that he escaped death. Still, he wonders who that kid with such incredible ability is. And speaking of him, Alan had cast a spell at the exact coordinates where the old man was, so the spell hits the man and opens a rift along the way. After that, a ghastly creature approaches the man calmly. At that moment, Alan arrives to ask some things he needed to know, but it seems someone arrived before him. Then this creature returns to the Count of Westfelt and informs that he eliminated Horace to prevent the information from leaking. According to the Duke, this was the minimum to be done since the blame lies precisely with the demons. His son goes further, saying that the demons put on such a show just to not end up killing the saint or the elf in the end. So it seems they're not as good as they claim. With that, the demon expresses his dissatisfaction, frightening the boy, and he soon states that he will deal with the princess and the elf. The Cav announces that he will take care of the Archbishop's hero, but his son asks to stay with the Archbishop after all. He's not a failure like his brother and can handle this easily. In the next scene, we're taken back to a moment from Lisa's childhood, where she was escorted in her carriage along an extremely dangerous path. Suddenly, the carriage shakes violently, causing the girl's uncle to hold onto her to prevent her from getting hurt. Outside, the other soldiers shout that monsters are attacking, so the protective knight asks the girl to stay inside while he goes out to join the allies in battle. To the princess's despair, the warriors were losing against the winged creatures, and one of them manages to reach her carriage, but her uncle manages to prevent the worst from happening. However, the monster reacts to the blow taken and seriously injures the knight, who is lifted into the air by the monster, but manages to impale it with his sword and ends up falling into a ravine along with his assailant. Back in the present, the heroes walk through the peaceful village where they pause their investigation until they question some men assembling a structure if there will be any festival there. One of the workers replies that the Spirits Festival will take place, where they receive the spirits of their ancestors, and it happens once a year. As the outsiders seem frightened, another man explains that it is a specific custom of this village, and that it's nothing more than a lively event where they dress up as spirits and dance. Then Lise asks if any of them saw a person wearing silver armor around, but no one knows what she's talking about, and Beatrice begins to accept that it was just a rumor. Strangely, not even the local guild has any information, and the group seems to be going in circles in this fruitless investigation. However, Noelle mentions an adventurous client who spoke about a ghost living in a village, possibly from the royal family. Filled with hatred for the oppression suffered in his family, this ghost wears a silver armor stained with blood and walks among the graves at night. While speaking, the elf wanted to scare her companions, and Beatrice falls for it by being startled by the fall of the sword. The friends make fun of her, but the bodyguard swears that she's not afraid of ghosts. Finally, they decide to go back to investigating the village, and Alan considers that if it's a demon responsible to him, this talk of spirits would be like bringing back the dead. Thus, Beatrice shows fear once again, and the girls start teasing her about it. This time, as Noelle mentioned about the graves, the team resumes their investigation from the cemetery, while Beatrice can't hold back her nervousness in this dark environment. At that moment, she is surprised by a guy they saw yesterday, but this time he looks bizarre. Still, this man leads the group to the village leader's house because according to him, he's the one who will know more about what's going on in these parts. Alan questions what the man was doing in the cemetery, and he replies that he was walking around and stumbled upon the group by coincidence, and then he left. Shortly after, inside the house, the leader says that this is a quiet place and he himself has never heard rumors about spirits and such. Then he offers his house for everyone to spend the night because the festival starts tomorrow and they could join. Alan immediately accepts the offer and the man goes to prepare the beds. After lying down, Lise dreams of her uncle in the beautiful palace garden wearing his typical armor and cloak. However, the girl calls her uncle Dad and he corrects her once again, although she likes the idea of having two fathers. The knight had just come to give his niece a kiss because he'll be away for a long time on an expedition, but he promises to come back as soon as he can. Lise doubts he's telling the truth, so the man teaches the child that believing in people is what creates connections and makes us human. Upon waking from the dream, Lise hears something outside, so she goes to the window to see what it is and sees her uncle walking away from the house. Lise runs after her uncle into the middle of the cemetery until undead rise from the graves and surround the princess. However, it was all just another dream, and since the girl was screaming, Alan went to check on her. In a few seconds, Lise catches her breath and gives a strong hug to her friend, who welcomes the girl back. The next day, as the sun sets, the Spirits Festival finally begins, and Beatrice doesn't hide that she found this celebration somewhat bizarre because treating the dead like this in her nation is a big taboo. Alan suggests that the royal knight exercise her authority to end the party, but the fearful warrior argues that no one has been hurt yet. As time passes, everything seems to be normal, but Alan can't shake off the feeling that there's something wrong with this village. Suddenly, the Macabre man returns and advises the foreigners to enjoy their stay and dance too, and Lise teases Alan to take Beatrice. Analyzing the situation with his special eye, Alan accepts the proposal and leaves with the bodyguard right behind. When she's alone, Lise sees a strange purple smoke hanging in the air and someone calling her name. When she realizes it, her uncle is in the middle of the crowd of residents celebrating, so she decides to go after him once again. When she finally reaches the man in the depths of a dark forest, Lise gets scolded by her uncle for being in such a dangerous place alone, but Lise argues that she's with her dad, and all this time she wondered where he was. After he fell, a huge search was conducted, but his body was never found, and that made the princess believe that the knight was still alive. So she asks what he's been doing all this time, and the uncle replies that he hated the royal family and went into hiding to seek revenge because his brother, Lisa's father, is trying to kill him. The princess doesn't understand why, so the knight explains that the king has always been in search of natural gifts, like the power to annihilate dragons, create unparalleled weapons, double the strength of soldiers, and bring glory to the nation, the ability to identify any gift, and lastly, Lisa's saintly power. Each of these powers is capable of destroying the kingdom, and the bearers of such abilities are called puppets of the gods. Lise comments on how absurd this is, and her uncle agrees but warns that the king thinks differently. In the king's mind, the bearers of natural gifts are rebels who have come to bring destruction in the name of the gods. That's why he decided to kill them all, and Lisa's uncle wants to save her. However, even though it's true, Liz would like to try to resolve the whole situation through conversation because her uncle once said that the most important thing is always to trust people. Thus, the man agrees that he said that, but soon realizes that he has no other option but to kill Liz violently, so he draws his sword against her. But just when he was about to end his niece's life, Alan intervenes in time. The knight recognizes the boy as the failure who was engaged to Lise, but Alan didn't come for small talk. He wants Alfred back immediately, so he casts his magic spell to break the curse. After suffering the effect, Alfred thanks Alan for freeing him from the curse. Then he tells his niece that he's already dead, and that it wasn't his choice to attack her. Furthermore, in reality, the king doesn't have the thoughts he mentioned before. It's the work of demons. However, it's true that he hates the royal lineage. Being second in line for succession, many did everything to get his attention, and some even tried to destroy his relationship with his own brother. For these and other reasons, Alfred came to detest the snake's nest, that is royalty, and decided to abandon his position, starting a new life from scratch. In this new life, he had successes, like becoming vice captain of the First Order of Knights. But the truth is that in the end, the only peace he had was Lise. After telling the whole truth, Alfred announces that he's running out of time, so he asks Alan to take care of his beloved niece because despite being a good girl, she's sometimes reckless. Finally, he would like to challenge the boy to a duel because after all, Alan will be responsible for the man's greatest treasure, and he needs to know if the young man is worthy. So Alfred starts the fight not as a corpse, but as a man, a knight, and a father. From the start, the duel seemed balanced even though Alan wasn't holding back. Alfred reminds that today is the Spirits Festival, where the living and the dead mingle, and this clash is the best example of that. Like in a dream of just one night, this is the only chance to dance with those who will never return. Despite the friendly nature of the duel, Lise seems anxious, but in reality, she finally enters a state of mourning when she remembers another event where she asks Alfred if he will protect her from the evil monsters. In turn, the knight promises that he will, but jokes that only until someone stronger than him appears on the way. Back to reality, Lise has the chance to finally say goodbye to her uncle, and he has the chance to apologize for leaving her like this, although he swears he's okay because he's leaving knowing that she was a true daughter to him. When she called him father, he had to struggle to hide the joy, and that was very difficult. Finally, Lise takes the hand of her stepfather and says she loves him, while Alfred finally departs for the last time. With the end of the festival, Alan quietly observes the village around him. When the local leader questions when he found out everything, Alan tells him that he knew all along that the town was full of the dead and that the leader controlled them all. However, Alan didn't want to get involved in it because the fact that the living and the dead coexist doesn't change the fact that this village is peaceful. The old man questions whether a city can really be at peace under the leadership of a demon, but the boy finds it too simplistic to presume that all demons are naturally evil. However, it seems that this gentleman doesn't stray far from the rule, so he hopes that the human knight will become an excellent pawn in his collection. As soon as the demon pits his undead against Alan, he cuts the threads that bind the zombies to the control of the village leader. Then, with the 2-in-1 charge, he cuts down any and all adversaries in front of him and then collects the blue stone that the old man dropped. With that, the demon serving the ducal family of Westfeld is forced to report another failure on his part, and Brett finds it absurd. His father rebukes him and comments that letting a little girl escape won't hinder the plans. Brett agrees because, unlike the demon, he did his part and brought the Archbishop's head. The next day, as Lise seems shaken, Beatrice makes it clear that she will always be by her side. Observing the blue stone, Alan identifies his brother Brett's power in it. Curiously, the only part that still belonged to Alfred was the head, and the head of the murdered general disappeared. Connecting the dots, Alan discovers what's behind it. Suddenly, Lise receives the message that General Searle has returned, and soon the three are surprised by the news. In the next scene, reminiscing about his childhood, Brett followed the funeral of who, according to him, was the kindest woman to ever set foot in this world. On that day, all he could feel was fear in the face of such an apathetic scene. Ever since then, upon returning to normal life, which always has to go on, all his father felt for him was disdain and pity every day. In the corridors of the Westfeld Duchy mansion, Brett heard the maid's comments always praising his brother Alan while he felt sidelined. Unconsciously or not, the boy began to vent his hatred for the world on his brother, who never treated him with contempt, projecting his father's figure onto him, who saw Brett as a failure. Soon, Brett wakes up from this nightmare and goes to greet Craig, the Lord of Westfeld, who, despite acknowledging his youngest son's greeting, only has eyes for his revenge plan against this kingdom and the gods, under the resentful gaze of Brett, who believes himself to be the only one worthy of wearing the crown. Meanwhile, through the streets and places around the kingdom of Adostella, the rumor of General Sella's return, who supposedly was dead, spreads through the mouths and ears of the population far and wide. According to Clark, vice-captain of the 1st Squadron of Knights, rumors spread like any gossip should, but it seems like this one is spreading too fast. Faced with this, he would like to know from Captain Edward if he thinks it's really Searle who's back or just some kind of imposter. The captain believes that whatever it is, it doesn't change what the 1st Squadron must do, which is to prevent those who wish to harm the kingdom. In Edward's opinion, that's exactly what the general would do, and it's up to them to uphold the will of the man who dedicated his life to protecting this kingdom. Arriving at an alley in the city, the two officers are surprised by a figure hidden by a cloak, but who soon reveals himself to be the Archbishop. Captain Edward questions what this man is doing in such a place without an escort, so he replies that he would like to share information alone with the captain elsewhere. Clark warns the man not to go, but Edward needs to prioritize gathering information in this delicate moment, so he leaves his subordinate responsible for protecting the kingdom and goes away. After some time, the captain and the Archbishop arrive at the castle training grounds, but instead of saying what he promised, the old man disappears from sight, until suddenly Lord Westfeld appears, ready to strike the captain from behind. Edward blocks the attack in time and soon mentions the sudden bloodthirstiness of his old acquaintance, Craig Westfeld. Since Craig's wife's death, Edward has never seen the man again, and the captain knows well that Craig is the kind of friend who attacks others from behind, as everyone saw, so he demands to know his intentions. However, Craig just smiles and comments that the Archbishop is on his side, then attacks Edward once again, starting a new duel in the same place where the two crossed swords so many times, to the point of generating a certain nostalgia in the Duke of Westfeld. However, Craig no longer needs this world, and that means Edward is also no longer necessary. Meanwhile, Brett remembers again the same funeral that dictated his family's fate, and it was there when the innocent child asked his brother why his mommy was sleeping. Alan tells him that she died, and that happens to everyone someday. While crying, the youngest holds his older brother's hand to feel some kind of comfort amidst the glaring suffering, and in the days that followed after his mother's departure, Brett just wanted to understand what it means to be a failure, and if he was one, and Alan tried to convince the boy that others' arbitrary judgment is worthless. However, Brett reveals that it's not just anyone who considers him a failure, but his own father, so he thinks his brother is lying and continues to suffer from Craig's harsh words. Over the years, Brett struggled to level up and be recognized by his father, which happened to some extent, but Craig's insults now targeted his brother Alan. Since then, Brett revolted because Alan didn't care about being seen as useless or make an effort to change that situation. So one day, Brett told the boy to his face that he deserved to be a hero of Westfelt, not Alan. Alan calmly responds that he knows the youngest well enough to know he'll be fine, but if he decides to go down the wrong path, perhaps nothing can be done to reverse his fate. Suddenly, an informant demon appears in front of Brett, informing him that negotiations on his side are going smoothly, so he asks about Brett's side. The boy warns that he used the Archbishop to betray Edward, but the informant warns that captain's gift is to nullify any gift within a mile radius, which befits his nickname, Disaster. Anyway, Brett isn't worried because his father is dealing directly with him, and in the worst-case scenario, Brett can use his gift without being affected by Edward. At that moment, another informant appears saying that the hero has appeared, so it's time to face the first squadron of knights. So before leaving, the first informant states that they are lending their strength to the Westfelt, so no failure will be tolerated, but Brett is sure he won't fail, unlike his failed brother. Meanwhile, in the middle of the city, Akira asks Sarah to be careful not to separate from her and end up disappearing from sight. When Sarah hugs the heroine tightly so that this never happens, Akira says that when the dust settles, she will find a safe place where the girl can live without fear. As they continue on their way, the two are being watched by shadowy figures surrounding the city until Akira gets tired of playing hide-and-seek and, away from the rest of the crowd, demands that the shadows reveal themselves. Faced with the enemies, the heroine explains that it's not difficult to track such an intense thirst for blood, but anyway, she emphasizes that none of them are capable of defeating her. In turn, the demons agree that they wouldn't stand a chance, but only if Akira were alone, which is not the case. So one of the demons applies the same symbol to Sarah that they imposed on the inhabitants of that cursed village, which uses the lives of the bearers as fuel for an explosion. In other words, with a simple fireball, Sarah will explode into the air like dynamite, so Akira must choose between staying and being killed alongside the girl, or fleeing and leaving her behind. Since the heroine chose the first option, soon fireballs are thrown at the two humans. Patrolling the surroundings of Stella, a member of the first squadron informs Clark, the vice captain, that he looks pale. Being honest, Clark confesses that he is quite worried about the captain, although everyone believes he can handle himself. At this moment, a demon manifests itself in front of the soldiers, and Clark doesn't know what to do because he knows he is not capable of dealing with this enemy with the forces he has at the moment. However, the demon reveals that it has nothing against the soldiers and is willing to tell the truth about this world. Meanwhile, the Archbishop appears on the balcony of the royal palace accompanied by General Cyril for a speech to the population, which gathers happily for the return of the famous general. Controlled by Brett's puppeteered gift, Cyril apologizes for causing so much commotion in the past few days, but now intends to bring the truth to everyone. Then the Archbishop asserts that the gods have been lying all this time because, in reality, the gifts are not blessings they grant, but rather a curse for life. Cyril cites the example of the majority of the people who wish to have a simple life as humble bakers, artisans, or maybe a clerk to travel the world in freedom, yet none of them ever had the right to choose the gift they received. On the contrary, these gifts are evil tools that the gods use to control the people like mere puppets. However, the Archbishop reveals that there is a way to break free from slavery, and that is only by giving up their gifts so that everyone can be masters of their own destiny. Faced with this unexpected speech, the people go into a tailspin to see their entire societal structure turn upside down in a minute, but Cyril claims to have the answer to all these doubts by bringing Brett Westfelt to the forefront. First, Brett points to a magical life form right behind the citizens, while Cyril emphasizes that this monster has the strength of 10,000 soldiers, as well as no weak points in its defense. Second, Brett, with his puppeteer gift, can control this creature so that it can protect the kingdom without the need for divine gifts. On the contrary, as the Archbishop tells, Westfelt's puppeteer gift is still capable of extracting latent abilities in others, awakening powers that remain dormant in the bodies of all, even stronger than the outdated gifts. Seeing that the public remains confused, Brett confesses that not everything can be done without gifts, and that's why he brought out a figure that can meet the needs of a difficult day. So when the demonic beast is revealed, the population panics in the face of such a hideous and notoriously evil figure. Still, Brett states that the kingdom has managed to establish a cooperative relationship with the demons, and it was through them that humans could discover the truth about the imprisonment of the gifts offered by the gods. Therefore, it will be the demons themselves who will give everyone the powers that will replace the gifts, restoring to men their desired independence. In his final speech, Brett calls on the people of Stella to live together the destiny they choose for themselves, and as everyone applauded the youngest Westfelt, the more adoration he desired, while feeling in his veins the sweet pride of his own ego. Meanwhile, his father still engages in an intense battle against the captain of the first squadron, and even though managing to nullify the opponent's gift, Edward is about to be defeated. Faced with this, Craig reinforces his point of view, arguing that gifts were never the main strength of a man, but rather the level he reaches by elevating the status of his spirit, which elevates the individual and makes him truly close to the gods, so close that it makes a human capable of killing a god. As for the vice captain, upon hearing the supposed truth, he draws his sword along with the first squadron, fulfilling his role as the shield of the people. At this point, the demon disappears and knocks down the soldiers one by one. In a short time, Clark had been hit, and at this moment, the demon returns thinking the man would surrender. But Clark honors his title of knight by giving his life for the kingdom, while the demon laughs at the soldier's ignorance. However, before the death of the vice captain could be realized, Beatrice approaches and agrees with the demon about warriors being ignorant sometimes, including herself usually. Meanwhile, Edward has finally been subdued while Craig accuses the captain of being unworthy. Suddenly, a demon appears in the room, but when questioned about its mission, this demon attacks Craig and reveals to be Akira in fact. Hours ago, when the fireballs were launched at her and Sarah, the magical seal that Alan had placed on the girl was activated, protecting her and the heroine with a protective shield. Back on the balcony of the hall, Brett announces the end of human slavery to make way for the era of the real power of men, but Alan is seen among the crowd, generating hatred from his brother. Alan examines Beatrice's demeanor in the kingdom's surroundings while she accuses the demons and the Duchy of Westphalt of executing the general and attempting to kidnap Princess Lise. On the other hand, the demon has no doubt that all these humans will soon be underground, so he decides to reveal the truth as a funeral gift. As he begins to speak, Mylene activates a listening device while remaining invisible, and the demon's speech is broadcast through speakers near the palace. The demon confesses that powerful gifts like those of the general and the princess are obstacles to his race, which values domination, so they want to convince humans to give up their gifts on their own. Desperate, Brett acts as if his brother were doing all this just to provoke him, then shouts for Alan to stop ruining his plan, causing the population to hear the word plan and become even more suspicious of the boy who presented himself as the savior of the nation. Furthermore, Princess Lise herself appears and reveals that the attempted execution against her did indeed occur at the hands of magical life forms like those Brett presented today as protectors of the kingdom. With no more chances to deceive the people, Brett laughs and asserts that Alan has meddled where he wasn't called, and then uses his puppeteer gift to control the guards, but Alan prevents the power at the right moment by cutting the strings emanating from the villain and knocking down the soldiers, the archbishop, and the general all at once. Faced with this, Brett has no choice but to appeal to the magical creatures he created, so chaos ensues in the capital square, causing people to run desperately for their lives. Seeing this catastrophe around him, Alan partially blames himself for not having been able to take care of his brother enough to prevent this tragedy. But at the same time, he remembers well that it was Brett himself who refused Alan's outstretched hand when there was time. This time, Brett tries to throw his magical strings to control his brother, but Alan pulls the strings onto himself and punches his brother, who came straight from the impulse to his fist, stunning him. Afterward, Lise welcomes a lost little girl in the midst of the incident, while Alan warns that he will deal with one more pending issue. Lise asks if it won't be too painful to deal with it, and this question triggers a memory in the boy when his father despised him for thinking his son was a failure, but this doesn't stop the boy from confirming that he will be fine. Meanwhile, Beatrice and Mylene bravely fight the demon while remaining invisible to try to equalize the battle. The demon recognizes the Amazon as the girl Horace created, but Beatrice corrects that now Mylene is a loyal ally of Ado Stella. Anyway, the demon reflects that if the other warrior standing there is as strong as the Amazon, it would be better to escape. Thus, the entity opens a portal to flee the scene, but Mylene throws a precise knife to interrupt the enemy, and soon Beatrice stakes her sword into the demon's chest and destroys him. After the conflict, Clark says he would like to ask many questions to the princess's bodyguard, and then bows to thank the old friend for her assistance. So Beatrice is pleased with the reunion, but asserts that there is no time for reminiscing now because the demons are attacking various points of the capital and causing terror to the entire helpless population. Faced with this, the first squadron of knights rises again to fulfill its role as the kingdom's shield and its people until a familiar blacksmith appears, bringing some weapons to reinforce the defense forces. Then Clark and his soldiers thank the effort of the elf Noelle, who brought everything she could to arm the resistance soldiers. Meanwhile, Akira is amazed at the supernatural movement of the opponent, who acts as if he knows what they will do next. Edward explains that Craig Westphalt uses his gift, Funeral Agent, to see the future and anticipate the attacks he will receive, and the man's bloodlust makes the captain of the first squadron shout that Mariel would never approve of this. This simple statement strikes a chord in the man who at that moment remembers predicting her death countless times with his gift, and even saving her as many times as he could. In the end, she still left in the same way without anything being done. For this reason, the Duke believes that his wife was merely a toy in the hands of the cursed gods, and soon she, with the title Holy Mother, was destined to be the mother of a hero. But instead, she conceived a failure who didn't even receive a gift. So the more his eyes bled, the more Craig cursed the god's fate that imposed death on his wife, and for that reason, he wants to devastate everything in front of him as a way to diminish the pain. On the other hand, Akira thinks the man is acting like a child and mocks the fact that he can't accept that he lost someone dear, and as he accepts that he is indeed paying too much attention to unnecessary details, Craig trades the light of his life force for the pure manifestation of diabolic power. Akira tries to act before it's too late, but Craig casts a spell before the heroine could react. She then invokes the blue lightning technique to combat the enemy's spell. However, the man-demon's ability was so great that Akira ends up losing the contest and is thrown forcefully against the wall. Edward warns Duke Westphalt that the excess of this diabolic power will destroy his own identity, but Craig is completely consumed by greed, so he uses his darkness to engulf Edward, causing the captain to be sucked into the macabre interior of the man-demon's consciousness, where Edward feels the sadness and resentment of his old friend. Because of this, he cries and asks for forgiveness from Craig for something, which for a second makes him stop the spell, and it seemed that Craig had returned to his original form, but then he plunges his sword into Edward's belly and brings him down forever. Faced with his own actions, Craig goes mad and shouts that no one will pretend to understand what goes on inside him anymore. Echo responds that man thought of his friend until his last breath, but Craig doesn't care about any of that anymore, so he decrees that now it's the heroine's turn to die, only for Alan to arrive in time to prevent the impact with his magical sword made by Noel. Among all the people involved in this war, Craig finds it amusing that it's his own failed son who's trying to stop him. Alan admits he preferred to be someone else in his son's place, but fears that might not be possible. Thus, all the father can show his son is the same old contempt, seeing him merely as another obstacle, conjuring another spell against the boy. Even though Craig has taken an extremely powerful form, Alan manages to defend against the spell with his sword, dealing a blow to his father's inflated ego, who questions who this kid really is, as his failed son would never do this. In response, Alan explains that Craig himself has already revealed who he is. But regardless, whether failed or not, there are still people depending on him around the kingdom, so he must honor his mother's name, who would never have wanted any of this to happen. Consumed by his vanity, hearing the name of his beloved wife from the mouth of the son he despises was the last straw for the Duke of Westphal, unleashing his deepest wrath to teach Alan never to speak Muriel's name again. Thus, he casts such a powerful spell against the boy that it throws him into the darkness of his own world, where Alan plunges through the murky waters of his father's mind. Feeling trapped within the ice, Alan feels despair coursing through his veins as memories of a distant past are brought to him from the outside, revealing that ultimately Craig Westphal was passionately in love with Muriel, and Alan never got to know this side of the Duke. On the contrary, all he received from his progenitor was disdain, if not indifference. In these moments of mourning when they're vulnerable, people change their behavior, and Alan felt it firsthand when Brett refused his help on that fateful day. In the end, he himself turned his back on everything to avoid emotionally involving himself in life's situations, trying to shield himself from the world's pains. Yet some people embraced the young man in the midst of darkness and made him believe again that there is still light in the darkness. With this in mind, Alan frees himself from his father's mental prison, and upon returning to the surface, invokes a technique from the end of the world called Demon-Slaying Sword, along with the blossoming of 100 flowers, which violently strike Craig Westphal and worsen the bleeding in his eyes. Even more enraged, Craig surrenders more of himself to demonic power, losing more of his own identity. The awakening of this unprecedented power generates a hurricane that provokes a storm, and the clouds gradually cover the kingdom of Adostella. Still, despite the chaos engulfing the city, Lee seeks to maintain the population's hope, trying to convince everyone that Alan will save the capital in time. Back to the Demon Man, Akira comments that no human is capable of defeating what Craig has become, and Alan replies that if that's the case, then this is a job for him. With that said, he attacks with his special ability, Beam of Light, in an attempt to break through the hurricane. But the deep impact carries the boy to the magical manifestation of his father's wrath, who screamed within an energy sphere as if wanting to escape or be killed at once. Confronted with his father's suffering, Alan considers that perhaps they are more alike than he imagined, because fleeing from the pain of abandonment isn't so different from being trapped within oneself by anger. Thinking this, Alan realizes that maybe he was wrong from the start, so he thanks his father for the lesson as he plunges his sword into the surface of that morbid expanse. The impact brings the man consumed by hatred back to the world, and he even manages to return the Duke to a more human form. But a beautiful magical butterfly approaches and lands on the Duke's hand, then his body begins to disintegrate. As he slowly disappears forever, Craig Westphal asserts that his failed son fulfilled his destiny, and in a final breath he cries for his eternal Muriel. Thus, the man's ashes are soon carried away by the butterfly into the skies. After all this event, Alan is rewarded with the title of Duke of Westphal, but he respectfully declines, to the surprise of everyone present except one. Afterward, the king, along with an advisor, reveals that none of this matters because he already knew this would happen. In an old memory, the king recalls that his beloved Lise adored little Alan, and the two were inseparable, so he rejoices that Alan protected his two most precious possessions, the kingdom and his daughter. Later, Mylene questions if Alan will go to Granholm until Lise arrives to reunite with her friends and asks to go along with them. After all, she's now called Lise Westphal, and she has to take care of her lands too. Mylene is surprised because the princess inherited the lands of Westphal, while Alan comments that what's done is done. As for Beatrice, who was originally a personal guard of the royal family, she was released from service because Lise is no longer part of the family, even though the woman is trying everything to serve the princess again. Thus, Lise is on her own, and she makes it clear that she would feel safer in Alan's company. The boy realizes that there are people in this world who still need him even if he is a failure, so the princess pulls him into the carriage, from where they will depart for the rest of their young lives wherever the wind takes them. At some point, the image of a kind of entity emerges, asking forgiveness for making Alan feel this way, because it didn't create him to be a hero and end up like this. On the other hand, Alan takes full responsibility for everything, as he has always been very persistent, but thanks to that, they were able to maintain what saved the lives of countless people. Finally, the entity asks the hero's wish, but in reality, all of this was a nostalgic dream of the warrior. After waking up, he descends from his room and finds Lise, who had prepared breakfast and invited the boy to eat together. Right behind him, Noel and Meline also appear as they wake up, leaving the princess speechless with the outfit the elf was wearing when she came down for breakfast. Alan asks if she can't wear something more appropriate before leaving the room, but Noel reminds him that he has seen her in a much more compromising state. At that moment, Lise shakes the young man, wanting to know what this talk is about, and all Alan wants to know is when he will find the peace he so desires. Shortly after, he explains that the blacksmith got hot in the forge and took off some clothes to cool down, and that he didn't feel lucky witnessing that. Noel feels sad because she doesn't get like that in front of just anyone, so the boy retracts and says he feels honored to have been part of that unique moment. Moreover, the elf asks the human to eat quickly to test her sword, but Lise reminds the boy that he had said he would help her with the paperwork of the ducal house, while Meline reminds him that he promised to take a nap with her. To make matters worse, the receptionist from the Adventurers Guild arrives with a huge stack of people wanting to hire his services, since he never shows up at the guild. For this reason, she pulls the adventurer to resolve this matter, but the other girls tell the attendant to stop where she is because each of them also has something scheduled with him. The receptionist argues that there are chaotic monsters that only the boy is capable of defeating. That's not the other's problem, so they pulled each limb of his body like in a tug of war, making him wish he had never been born. Hours later, even without knowing how, he's exhausted from having managed to do everything he promised to do, so he finally lies down on the grass to get some of his long-awaited peace and tranquility. But right after that, he informs the girls that he's going to travel to the Victor Empire to get out of the routine for a while and maybe find a good place to live. The girls limit the decision, while Noelle mentions that this empire is always rivaling with her homeland, Granholm, and that there are many very skilled dwarf blacksmiths there, so this is her chance to learn a lot from them. Alan asks what time he invited the elf to go along, so Meline asserts that she's going too. As the blacksmith insists on accompanying him on the trip, the boy gives in before asking Lise what she decided to do, but the princess has work to do for the duchy. Whether having responsibilities or not, Lise joins the group and they all head to the Victor Empire, with the princess leaving Beatrice to take care of all the work she left behind. Speaking of which, Noel comments to Lise that she is no longer just the princess, but also the lady of the duchy, so she shouldn't leave. But that's why the princess is going along, because the empire continues to want to unite the continent, and as responsible for defending the kingdom's borders, the head of the House of Westfeld wants to spy on the empire's internal situation. Noel argues that she could have at least taken Beatrice as a bodyguard, but Lise reminds her that she herself said she feels at ease when the princess goes alongside Alan. Hearing that, the boy thinks it's too much pressure on him, so Lise says she counts on the boy, and all the girls laugh together. After a long journey, Noel was dozing off as were the other passengers until the carriage bumped into something and woke up the elf, who grumbled. Lise warns that this empire is surrounded by mountains and deserts, so there's no comfortable path. At one point, Alan stops the carriage, so the girls see that ahead there are several sand wolves, bloodthirsty beasts also known as desert reapers. Faced with this, Alan exterminates all the wolves and returns to the carriage in 7 seconds, continuing the journey without major problems so far. However, Alan notes that this would be an ideal terrain for an ambush, so the fact that there are desert wolves there makes him think that someone may be manipulating things. Sometime later, they stop in a city far from the imperial capital, which is still quite busy. Alan thinks the air around is a bit tense because even being a border city, there are too many guards in this city. Suddenly, he bumps into a girl on the way and realizes it's Henriette, an old friend. She asks what he's doing there. He returns the same question because the daughter of a marquess shouldn't be walking around without any security. Henriette says it's none of the boy's business and tells him to let her go. Noel asks who a cute friend of Alan's is, and Lise remembers that she's from the Lindfist Marquess family. Henriette notices Lise Adostella's presence and questions what the Duchy of Westfeld's chief is doing there. Not knowing what to say, Lise replies that she's just hanging out with friends, and Henriette comments that the girl lies very poorly, but that doesn't matter. After all, it's none of her concern, but the girl warns that the empire is on edge and this situation could turn the country upside down, so she advises everyone to go back home. Noel gets angry, while Alan remembers he has nowhere to go back to. So Henriette emphasizes that the Black Wolf Knights are acting, and the Empire gives them carte blanche to do whatever they want, so it's the most feared order in the country. With that, she turns around and leaves out of the blue, while Alan thanks her for the warning. Once that was done, Noel realizes they arrive at a terrible time, and everyone grows anxious, until Alan abruptly dashes off, instructing the girls to count the passing cows in the meantime. Soon, Alan catches up to Henriette and inquires whether she issued that warning as the Marquess's daughter or as a disciple of the gods. She responds that in their past life, she used to dictate what he should do as a disciple, but in this world, she's just a girl named Henriette, albeit with a fraction of the power she once had. Alan wonders how she ended up in this world, and she speculates it's because her fate is to solve problems, advising him to leave as soon as possible if he values her counsel as he claims. With this, Alan realizes she came only because she was worried about him, so he smiles and bids her farewell. Now he needs to find the girls again, but an explosion grabs his attention. Approaching the scene, he sees a man fleeing with a knife aimed at him, so he tackles the man to the ground. However, a magical circle envelops the man, tearing him apart from within, causing his death and leading Alan to believe it's the work of a demon. Shortly after, a knight arrives, claiming the deceased was suspected of causing the explosion and demands to know what happened. In his defense, Alan states he only defended himself after being attacked, but didn't kill the assailant. The warrior argues that his story doesn't quite match the scene, but wants to know how the boy killed the suspect without using his gift. Alan asks how she knows he didn't use it, and she reveals her gift is to see the gifts others have used. Therefore, she suspects Alan may be a demon because demons possess powers beyond that, and she cannot identify if this was the work of one. Nonetheless, as an Imperial Knight, she cannot overlook this case. Assessing the situation, Alan knows killing this officer would cause trouble with the Empire, so when she moves to apprehend him, he vanishes from there using some form of magic. Quickly, the woman orders for soldiers to close the borders while trying to cover up this incident to avoid worsening the kingdom's situation. Next, we see it was Marlene who saved her friend with her invisibility and led him to the kingdom's sewers. But to his surprise, Henriette was there once again, scolding the boy for not following her instruction. Lyce recounts that after Alan's departure, they stood there counting the passing cows. When the 20th cow passed, Henriette arrived offering help and using Marlene for it. Alan is impressed that Marlene's copy, a power of demonic origin, went unnoticed by the knight's eyes, thus he praises his companions. Then he emphasizes the need to get out of there as soon as possible, but Henriette explains that the borders are likely already closed by now and Marlene probably wouldn't be able to carry everyone out, especially since the guards understood how Alan escaped. So everyone looks to Henriette, as she's the smart one in solving problems, and she confesses that perhaps she has thought of something. She then leads the group to her home, a mansion where a butler recognizes Alan. Similarly, the boy remembers him as Silas, the head butler of House Westphalt when he was expelled from there. Silas explains that he and the other servants left House Westphalt in protest, so the kind-hearted Henriette welcomed them all afterward. At this point, the Marquis's daughter arrives to end the conversation and instructs the butler to show the house to these people promptly. Unaccustomed to such comfort, Noelle and Marlene jump on the couch like children. Lyce scolds them, but Henriette tells them to make themselves at home because she lives in this mansion alone, so there's no problem in disturbing. Apparently, there was an accident that caused her parents to leave, and as the only child, she was left alone in the mansion. Then Alan questions what's happening in this country after all, and Henriette reveals that the Emperor was executed over a year ago. Noelle questions whether it's safe to spread such vital information of the Empire to outsiders, but somehow Henriette knows that no one there will spread this secret, making Lyce wonder why she's so confident about it. Nevertheless, the Marquis's daughter suggests that everyone stay there until the dust settles. As night falls, Alan watches the backyard from the balcony until Henriette enters without permission. According to her, the Emperor always moved under heavy guard, so she believes his death is due to some demonic force, because only such beings would be capable of committing this crime without leaving traces, besides Alan. Alan adds Henriette to this list, but she argues that killing the Emperor would bring her no advantage. That said, Alan takes the opportunity to ask since when the girl has been observing him, because hiring Silas along with the others couldn't be just coincidences, not to mention bumping into him as soon as he entered the Empire. Offended, Henriette insists that they are indeed just coincidences, and promptly leaves Alan's room. Outside, she's happy to see that now he can smile. As she recalls, Alan was worthy of the power and mission of a hero, with his strong and unwavering spirit. However, the fear and prejudice people felt against him hurt the hero and broke his heart. So it's true, Henriette worried about Alan, and that's why she reincarnated in this world, hoping he would at least be happy in his next life because she never wanted to see him feel what he felt that day again. Therefore, she's glad to see that someone was able to make him smile, even though it bothers her that this person isn't her. The next day, Noelle is filled with boredom, eager to see the region's blacksmiths and their outstanding forges, but Henriette tells the elf to forget about it because the city is surrounded by guards everywhere. So the blacksmith starts forging an imaginary sword due to withdrawal. Meanwhile, Alan wonders if the Black Wolf Knights are not just after him, and if so, maybe it's a good idea to keep Noelle safe at home. However, the elf wants to see the region's dwarf blacksmiths and jumps for joy when Henriette allows it to happen. With Marlene as her bodyguard, the elf has a grin from ear to ear, so she takes a tour around the city, getting to know the local forge and cuisine. However, curiously, there were many elves in that place, and for some reason, they couldn't take their eyes off Noelle. At first, she thinks it's because she's cute, so she prepares to receive a compliment at any moment until 3 male elves approach and are stopped by Marlene. Other elves surround the blacksmith like zombies, so the Amazon grabs her friend by the wrist and runs with her. Upon returning home, Noelle is a mess. Upon hearing the story, Lyce comments that it's no wonder that Noelle attracts people's attention because of her beauty, and because of this comment, the elf promises that from now on, she will be more aware of how truly beautiful she is. However, Henriette bursts the blacksmith's bubble by revealing that the reason for the elf's attention is not that. In fact, it's something that relates to the elf's past, so the human wants to know if she's ready to hear it. Noelle knows almost nothing about her past, so Henriette calls everyone outside to teleport them to the elven forest. Looking around, everyone is impressed with the spell and the vastness of the forest. Henriette explains that they are actually in the same place as before outside the mansion. The difference is that this is a different dimension. In the Elven Forest, there is a magical shield around to control intruders, and whoever discovers about them there has their memory erased upon leaving the area without exceptions. However, Henriette has permission to enter this place. That's why Noelle has no memories of her past, she deduces. Alan is impressed by the elves having a barrier they can't even detect, and it's for this reason that he accuses Henriette of being involved in this process. The girl admits that she helped a little here and there, but nothing major. So they continue on the path behind the settlement they came to seek. In the middle of the forest, a bird lands on Noelle's shoulder, and this gives her a strange feeling that she belongs to this place. Suddenly, several elves emerge from the shadows of the trees and surround the visitors. Alan sees no hostility in the approach of the natives, which Henriette agrees with as the sovereign of this people has returned. That said, the elves bow before their queen and welcome her. Noelle asks if they're talking to him, and an elf says that they eagerly awaited her return. Alan notices that this is due to the fairy queen's eyes, as Horace mentioned. Henriette explains that the eyes of the fairy queen, the Grom site, are the mark of the elven royal family. This means that Noelle Leonhardt is descended from an almost extinct lineage of her race's royalty. Soon, the cloaked elf announces that he was the regent during the queen's absence, and his name is Percival. Either way, Noelle is terrified by this sudden turn of events, so Percival assures her that he will make the elf know the place before she decides whether to stay or not. That said, everyone crosses the elven forest until they reach the settlement. Alan admires the tranquility that hangs in the air, and Mylena thinks a nap there would be nice. Lace is surprised to see elves using human tools and furniture. Percival begins to explain that it was Henriette who brought everything, but the girl tells him to be quiet. Then the regent asks the queen if she liked the settlement's way of life, but the blacksmith asks not to be called that way yet. At this point, two children of a different race arrive, presenting their ruler with hazelnuts, promising to bring even better things the next day. Noelle accepts the gift willingly, but Alan has a strange expression at the scene. Anyway, as the queen is getting to know the region, Percival asks the children to make room and also tells Philip to come out of where he's hiding. Once done, the regent scolds the boy and tells him to go play with the other children. Noelle says she can exchange a word or two with the boy, but Percival insists that Philip move away. The little boy rebels since those bad kids were able to talk to the queen, so the regent tells him more emphatically to leave, which this time he does. Noelle questions what the boy meant by the other children being bad, but Percival avoids the subject and continues with the walk. As night falls in the previous dimension, a woman jumps outside Henriette's mansion until a man calls her by her name, Lisette. In response, the woman reminds Oswald that she should be called Captain, and then asks if he found out anything about the entrance to the Elven Forest. Oswald complains that the elves are too cautious, and Lisette understands why, as her partner exudes a bloodthirst that scares everyone away. Oswald is offended and throws in the woman's face that she was the criminal who broke the worst taboo possible in the kingdom's history, so she puts her sword to the man's neck and tells him not to mess things up by causing trouble. Impatiently, Oswald pushes the sword away and says goodbye. Meanwhile, the Elven Forest celebrates the queen's arrival with a grand party where everyone seems excited, except Alan, who remains with a closed expression. Then Percival approaches and asks for a word, recounting that for beings who live as long as elves, this decade without a monarch was both short and long at the same time. Anyway, the queen's absence caused great anxiety among the people because the elves cannot live without their leaders, because without the presence of one, children stop growing and adults can no longer have children, leading the whole society of this race to a slow and painful death. According to Percival, thankfully Henriette brought the light back to the community because one day she told a story about a lost elf whose only interest is forging. Percival commented that elves hardly ever have an interest in this activity, and Henriette finishes by warning that that elf has the eyes of the sovereign fairy. But it wasn't just Noel that the human brought to the settlement. The ruler mentions that their community always avoided contact with other races, so they lived isolated in their territory. However, Henriette started bringing products from various different cultures, and that opened the elves' eyes to the advantages of having contact with the outside world. Since then, the elves have started visiting and living in various other places. Because of all this, Percival acknowledges that Henriette never spares efforts and always works to help others. That said, Alan questions if it was she who brought those demonic children to the settlement, and the ruler regrets that the human noticed this detail. Knowing that some sensitive and talented individuals can see the aura of a demon, Alan makes it clear that he has no problem against demons, but he is still curious why they live with the elves, who generally hate that race. Soon Percival reveals that about 3 years ago, Henriette asked the elves to shelter some orphaned children. Obviously, the majority of the population was against it, so Henriette revealed that the elves would be able to thrive even without a monarch if they lived alongside other races. However, there's still a portion of the people who do not approve of this idea to this day. After the exhausting day, Noelle is exhausted after being exposed to an entire community as their ultimate leader. Speaking of which, Mylene asks if her friend is going to assume this title of queen, but she doesn't know yet. Anyway, since the elves are preparing this place for the group to spend the night, everyone goes their separate ways after saying goodbye, and Alan acts differently when saying goodbye to Henriette. Despite everyone going to hunt for their beds, Noelle stayed exactly where she was, haunted by thoughts related to everything she discovered and experienced today. Years ago, she remembers that Vanessa did not fulfill her wish to forge a blade that surpassed a sacred sword, but Noel achieved that goal. Because of this, she reflects on what her next dream would be now that she has completed the mission that guided her steps. In search of an answer, Noel takes a deep breath outside, confessing to the moon that she got there without knowing anything about herself. At the same time, Alan watched his friend's reflection through the window of his room. Suddenly, Henriette appears in the warrior's quarters, asking if that different look he gave her was to invite her to the room. Alan confirms that it is, so the girl admits that she doesn't have much experience with this kind of thing, so she asks the boy to be gentle in teaching her while pouting. However, Alan says she can leave now, so the reincarnated noblewoman goes crazy with the boy's slowness in refusing a beauty like her. Alan replies that she is far from being that beautiful on the inside, so Henriette loses her patience completely and asks what the guy wants. Alan mentions the fact that the girl brought the demon children to the elves, so she reveals that demons are not a race in themselves. On the contrary, when someone feels such deep hatred to the point of wishing death to all, the will of the world recognizes that person as a demon. However, there are some exceptions, like children of demonic parents who are born this way. When they arrive in this world, this type of child is despised wherever they go, even without having any guilt in being demons. To make matters worse, demon parents tend to execute their own offspring because surviving demons become the strongest, forming a cruel, vicious cycle. For this reason, it is almost impossible for a child of this type to survive. In the case of those two that Alan saw, Henriette took them at the moment they were to be killed. Henriette is offended by the smile the boy gave upon hearing this, but he explains that good deeds like this are typical of the friend, leaving her embarrassed. The next day, Percival takes the whole group to visit one of the wonderful places in the elven forest, Enchanting Leaves. On the other hand, Noel couldn't get the story of being queen out of her head. Seeing this, Henriette asks the elf not to feel bad if she chooses to refuse because whether she wants it or not, the elves are trying a way to live without their monarch, so Noel must make this decision according to her own will. That said, the dew of many demons appears again, this time giving their queen a shiny stone which, according to them, is a treasure. Henriette says that this is a spiritual stone widely used in alchemy, being a crystallization of elven power. Suddenly, Philip arrives running and throws the stone to the ground to protect his queen from the demons, so Percival scolds the boy again, who runs away. Alan notices that the elves' aversion to demons is indeed very deep, and Henriette highlights that it's not just the elves, while seeing that Les hesitates to comfort the two small ones because of their origin. That said, Henriette leaves to deal with other things. Sometime later, she finds Philip in a dark alley and talks to the young man, trying to convince him that those children are harmless. After all, they also want to give presents and be friends with the queen, just like Philip. Therefore, in the end, perhaps they are more alike than one imagines. Then she gets up and leaves the boy thinking a little about what he did, and he realizes he needs to apologize. However, Oswald captures the child and forces him to show the way to the elven forest. Meanwhile, the group of visitors enjoys the beautiful feast being served at the table for them. Everyone gets excited about the food except Noel, who still seems very disturbed. Henriette shows concern about this, and Alan understands the reason. After all, it's not every day that you're called to become the sovereign of an elven civilization as the only means of its reproduction. In the meantime, Noel reflects that with all this greenery on her plate, what she really wanted was a rare beefsteak. The next day, everyone bids farewell to Henriette, who leaves Percival in charge of guiding the people. Alan asks about the reason for her departure, and the elven regent informs that the young Philip left the forest and never returned. Back in the city, the girl begins her search for the little boy, while in the elven village, Alan admires the carefree way the residents live their lives. Mylene wonders whether it's carelessness or laziness. With this in mind, Lise asks Percival if elves don't have the concept of work, and with some embarrassment, he confesses that his race is not known for being very industrious. At the same time, in his defense, he points out that elves don't need to work like many others, as they grow at a much slower pace and have a much longer lifespan, which gives them a very different perception of time from many other species so accustomed, and that includes the notion of working like crazy. Speaking of which, Alan asks if Noel is crazy for being an elf and working like crazy, while Mylene wants to know who cooks the food. Percival responds that food is not a problem. Then he extends his hand, and an apple falls into it instantly. According to him, this happens because the forest shares all its generosity with them, considering that they are part of the forest, just as the forest is part of them. Analyzing both the forest and the species living there with his magic, Alan notices that they really are one and the same, and Percival explains that they are born, grow, and die there. They care for their wounded, feed themselves, and build their roofs with what nature produces. Therefore, the cycle of life and reproduction is due to the unity and respect with the forest. Speaking of which, Percival asks what Noelle has been thinking of life there, and she thinks it's cool, but before finishing her thought, Alan asks if he could live there because his dream upon leaving the Empire was to find a peaceful place to live. Percival explains that for that, Alan must be recognized by the forest as a compatriot, but he doesn't know exactly how that happens. For this reason, Noel asks how demonic children manage to live there, and the regent replies that Henriette introduced them to the village. Besides, they will only be taken care of for a short period, and they will not live there forever. Alan asks if he can use that as an excuse to spend some time in the village, and the elf responds that it wouldn't be a problem if necessary. By the way, the boy asks how long that short time would be, and Percival estimates it would last around 100 years. Lise asks if that's what he considers short, but Mylene already figured out that this is what it means to be an elf. At this point, the winds blow and inform something to the regent, who responds that he will take care of the matter. Alan asks who he talked to, and Percival says that the forest said someone came to visit. Mylene is worried it might be someone suspicious, but the regent reassures her by saying that many people in the Empire have the right to enter the forest. Soon, Percival asks for permission to suspend Your Majesty's guidance, so she releases the subordinate, taking advantage of her brief moment of sovereignty. With this, Alan suggests they stay quieter there because it could be a problem if someone from the Empire notices them in the vicinity. As Noel insists on pointing out it would be a problem because they're after Alan. So they spend some time quietly enjoying the village with Mylene cheating at chess against the elf, while Alan only expends energy to breathe in and out. Seeing that the kid is more than comfortable, Lisa asks if he really plans to stay there, and the boy confesses that's the intention because the place is great and the elves are nice, besides Henriette always being around. That said, Lise replies that she already imagined that after all, he and Henriette really are very close friends. Alan tries to explain that there's nothing going on between them, although they're not just friends. Lise gets angry and asks what the girl is then, but even Alan can't explain properly, so he says it's as if they were destined to be close. This time, Lise freaks out and asks what's with the talk of destiny, and Soldier Alan finds himself at a loss for this ambush, while the other girls tease the princess's jealousy. Lise pretends it's none of her business, but Noel asks her to chill because she'll keep an eye on the boy for her. So Lise asks if the elf also intends to stay there, and she replies yes, to be able to calmly consider whether she will govern the village or not. Also, here she can set up a forge and learn from the resident dwarves. Jumping on the bandwagon, Mylene and Lise decide they will live there too, and Alan asks the princess if this won't be a problem for her since she's in charge of a duchy. Then the girl gets choked up. Upon arriving home, Henriette receives a visit from Lisette Berwald, captain of the Black Wolves Knights, and she wants to know if the Marquis's daughter knows anything about the Emperor's death, as she heard that the girls hosted a suspect of this incident. Henriette says it's absurd, and the woman pretends to believe, but actually she decided to come based on a hunch, considering that the suspect was seen a few days ago in Loris and then disappeared suddenly, with no sign of him crossing the border, as if he had never been in the Empire. Since the girl is the only person she knows capable of performing a spell of this level, Berwald presumes that Henriette may have something to do with this story. That said, Black Wolves invade the property and vandalize much of it in search of traces of the wanted man, while the captain warns that the next place to be investigated is the Elven Forest, since Henriette loves to pass through there. By the way, Oswald just arrived in the forest, guided by the young Philip. Upon being greeted by Percival, the elf notices that there's some trouble brewing, especially when Philip shows up apologizing for what he did. Oswald was munching on a fruit and tossed it away because he hated the taste. Then he asks if Percival is the leader of the local village. At that moment, the elf recalls when Henriette mentioned that the Black Wolves have the extrajudicial right to mete out punishments, meaning they can punish you if you so much as look at them funny. Thus, he introduces himself as the regent of the Elven Sovereign and questions what the man is doing in the forest. Oswald says the elves are harboring a criminal on their lands, and Percival really has no clue what the matter is about. Losing patience, the human demands they bring the wanted man to him immediately, until the demonic children arrive innocently to greet the regent. Thus, Oswald discovers that the elves are hiding much more than the Black Wolves imagined, so with a snap of his fingers, he blows up a large region of the forest where they were. Listening to the distant roar, Noel sees her magic stone shining, indicating that the children and the forest are in danger. She doesn't exactly know how she knows this, but an image suddenly flashes through her mind, showing the little ones being attacked by a Black Wolf Knight. Considering attacking children unforgivable, she rushes to their aid immediately, but Alan hesitates to join her, considering whether the intruder might have a just cause. After all, in his previous life, he would have rushed to the rescue without a second thought, but he's no longer a hero, and saving everyone indiscriminately only brought him immense emptiness. Seeing that her friend is suffering in some way, Lise asks how he's doing, and Alan pretends it's nothing, only to then invite the princess to join him and the other girls. On the way to the rescue, Alan simply didn't want to have to think about these things. He just wanted to live in peace. Meanwhile, Percival protects the children with a magical barrier from the explosion. Nevertheless, Oswald asserts that the execution of the two brats will still happen. So the elf tells the children to move away and expands the shield to block the enemy's passage, but he blows up a tree behind the elf and knocks him down. With that done, the two demon children are defenseless against the human until Philip takes action and stands in front of them. Oswald gets irritated and adds the young elf to his execution list, but a forge hammer flies at the Black Wolf's head, hitting him square on. With Noel's arrival, Percival calls out for his sovereign, and Oswald asks if she's the leader of the elves, but she claims to be just a blacksmith and orders the jagged-toothed one to flee. Oswald comments that crazies keep popping up in this forest, so he tries to explode the two girls, but they manage to avoid turning to ashes by running fast enough. Percival notices that his queen is in danger, so he gathers his last strength to conjure a sword and attack the Black Wolf, but the enemy is faster and manages to subdue the elf, leaving him hanging by a thread. However, before the final blow can land, Alan arrives and blocks Oswald's sword, lamenting that he's not lounging on a tree drinking coconut water as he had planned. The Black Wolf tries to explode the enemy, but Alan inhibits the enemy's abilities with his magic. So he switches targets and attacks Noel this time, leaving a trail of fire that almost reaches the elf, but Alan cuts the magical line and prevents it from happening. This connection that Alan severed wasn't meant to be seen, but the human has the ability to identify such artifice and could save the elven hair. Oswald gets furious at being powerless against a kid, so he tries once more to hit him with his explosion, but his strategy is tired and ineffective. Left with only his sword as a solution, he advances on the opponent, but Alan shows that his superiority is too great to allow himself to be threatened. The boy questions why the man tried to kill those children, and the opponent replies that he doesn't need a reason to execute a demon. Enraged by this declaration, Alan unleashes a powerful blow with his sword that knocks the enemy to the ground, ending the duel. After the victory, Lise heals Philip and confides in Alan that she would really hate to see these children suffer, being so innocent they don't even know right from wrong yet. And that goes for the little demons too. Besides that, they need to decide what to do with the intruder, considering that defeating a Black Wolf will stir up trouble with the Empire and Henriette will certainly be angry about it. Speaking of the girl, she suddenly arrives wanting to know if Alan has messed up again. But soon she calms down, saying she'll handle everything with her unmatched talent, and she announces that the roads have been cleared, allowing visitors to return home. Everyone bids farewell to the elven village, and Percival makes one last call for Noel to live with them, but she thinks she's still too young to become queen, as she knows little about everything that surrounds this world she inherited, like demons, the forest, or the elves themselves. However, if she continues traveling with her friends, she's sure it will bring the wisdom she needs to become a true monarch every day. Either way, the region eagerly awaits the hare's return. So finally, everyone bids a definitive farewell, and Alan's group continues on their journey. As soon as they load the carriage with enough supplies for the journey, Noel grumbles that she wished she had more time to take a stroll and see more of the forges. So she promises to come back to this town and spend a whole month observing the artisan dwarves and their extraordinary skills. Meanwhile, Liz was thinking they didn't bid Henriette farewell properly, considering all she had done for them and the lack of a proper goodbye. Alan is certain she doesn't mind it being that way, given her difficulty in accepting gratitude. Besides, they can always come back another day and have more time to do things leisurely. With that said, the group prepares to depart until a red-haired boy rushes in begging the adventurers to save his older sister. Alan laments that they're leaving precisely to avoid more trouble like this, but Noel asks him to at least hear the guy out. So the boy introduces himself as Curtis Lindqvist, Henriette's younger brother, and he needs help with an urgent matter related to her. Gathering in a tavern, the group learns that Henriette has been captured by the Black Wolf Knights, accused of executing the Emperor, and is being taken to the imperial capital for sentencing. Moreover, an organization like the Black Wolves would never accept her being proven innocent, as it would surely nullify the evidence as they always do. Especially considering that Henriette is not well regarded by some factions of the royalty and nobility due to her brilliance, which has always sparked resentment and envy from her adversaries. Seeking help from family would be valid, but Curtis points out that he and his sister are isolated even among the Lindqvist. Interestingly, Lise recalls when Henriette said she was an only child and her parents had left, leaving her to live alone. Shortly after this explanation, young Curtis understands if the group needs time to consider such a complicated request, but he pleads for them to consider it, as his sister means a lot to him. Back in their carriage, Alan reflects on what to do in light of the situation, until the girls arrive to discuss Curtis after hearing everything. Alan regrets that this matter has arisen just as they're leaving, and in a way, it all seems suspicious. For starters, Henriette doesn't have a younger brother, and Noel reminds that guy never saw any of them, so he couldn't know they were friends with his supposed sister. Alan agrees, but still it seems that Henriette was indeed taken by the Black Wolves. Through his divine eyes, he managed to see her being taken to the royal capital under heavy guard. In moments like this, the adventurer understands that the best course of action is to investigate the situation closely, so he proposes to look into this case, even if it might be a trap. Meanwhile, on the way to the capital, the Marquis's daughter already expected the journey not to be comfortable, and honestly, she thinks her captors have gone too far. Captain Lisette Burwald tells the girl not to take it personally, as this treatment is part of the protocol. However, the officer knows that Henriette has an enigmatic and unpredictable side, and she cannot afford to falter and allow a prisoner of this caliber to escape, or else her head would surely roll. Fed up, the young woman understands, and then asks the captain if she kept her promise. Burwald confirms she did, and now that the Emperor's executioner has been caught, whoever else is in Henriette's group, or what they do in the Empire, no longer matters to her. Moreover, they're probably leaving Loris and heading to the border by now. Regardless, Henriette promises that if anything bad happens to them, she will kill Burwald. Meanwhile, Alan arrives with his partners to meet Curtis, who introduces the knight by his side as his coachman, a trusted man. The girls don't like what they see and already warn Alan that something smells fishy. Curtis announces that they will travel to the capital in his carriage, so they set off on the journey. Along the way, the atmosphere seems tense as the group ponders what kind of trap this could be. Curtis notices the girl's unease and asks if something's wrong, but they obviously dodge the subject. Alan is more direct and questions whether the guy is indeed Henriette's brother, as well as wanting to know how he found out that the group was friends with his supposed sister. Noel finds this somewhat rude, but when she sees Alan persisting with the questions, she quickly supports her friend in the interrogation. Understanding the confusion of the group, Curtis confesses that he comes from a lesser branch of the Lindqvist family and Henriette is actually his cousin, although he always admired her like a sister. Unlike her, Curtis never had any special talent, so he was often ridiculed and treated as a failure. The only one who tried to understand the boy was his cousin, Henriette. She had a more straightforward speech about telling the boy to pick himself up and dust himself off, although she also saw him as a pathetic loser. However, she still had the ability to listen to the boy and stand by him when no one else did. Unfortunately, Curtis' parents didn't like his new friend and tried to separate the two. From that moment on, he could only watch the girl from afar, and as for how he knew the group was friends with her, Curtis coincidentally saw them together one day. Just like when Henriette was taken by the Black Wolves, he could only watch, so he feels like a coward since he couldn't do anything as always. Lees disagrees with the guy's opinion because he had the courage to tell them the truth and sought help to save his cousin. Noel apologizes for having doubted the young man, but he understands he should have clarified things earlier. By the way, he wants to know about the relationship between Alan and Henriette since they get along so well. Envious, Lees and Noel glare angrily and agree with the thought, as the two seem like they've known each other for decades. They're so in sync. More innocent, Mylene thinks they're married, causing Lies to freak out and leaving Alan once again in an awkward situation. Watching the consequence of her comment, Curtis finds it amusing not knowing that his adoptive sister had such committed friends. When night falls, Captain Burwell's train sets up a camp to continue the journey tomorrow, and Henriette wonders if her captor won't take a nap. Burwell ironically thanks her for the concern, but emphasizes that her orders are not to take her eyes off the prisoner for even a second. Changing the subject, Henriette asks what happened to the Black Wolf that caused turmoil in the Elfwood, and she tells her that Oswald was forgiven by the organization, considering that the main objective was achieved, which was to capture the Emperor's executor. The girl mocks the parallel justice that absolves any atrocity a Black Wolf commits wherever they may be, especially just to arrest an innocent who needs to be framed as a criminal. But deep down, she's relieved to know that Alan is okay because she would hate to see him getting hurt because of her after all this time apart. At dawn, a crowd gathers in front of the gate of a city where the group stop to refuel, and this entrance is supervised by some soldiers who prevent some from entering. Nola questions the reason for all this concern, and Alan hopes it's not the case, but believes it has to do with what they did recently. Either way, he plans to go to the local adventurers guild and ask what's going on. Curtis supports the idea, but suggests that Noel and Mylene wait in the carriage because elves and Amazons are not very common in the Empire. With that decided, Lays enjoys her moment alone with her sweetheart and can't hide her happiness in closing her eyes and only being able to smell the sweaty aroma of her favorite knight. This happiness is expressed in excitement to go to the guild and gather the most valuable information they seek, but her enthusiasm led her to start the search in the wrong direction, forcing Alan to correct the path. Arriving there, Lees comments on the melancholic atmosphere of the place, and Alan responds that the fact that the city is closed prevents adventurers from practicing their professions, leaving everything to rot. At the same time, Curtis shows Noel and Mylene where they will be able to stay while the search is conducted in the city. However, the elf questions if it is indeed safe to stay in this hotel, since the Black Wolves are after everyone in the group. But the boy assures that everything will be fine because the owners of this establishment would never betray their customers. Furthermore, Curtis has no doubt that his coachman will not allow anyone to touch them because he is one of the most talented knights in the Empire. Speaking of the soldier, Mylene asks if they already know each other besides knocking on his armor as if it were a door. Noel takes her friend away to avoid trouble, but she confesses to being curious about the guy wearing armor all the time, even with the helmet. Curtis explains that the guy there is very shy, so he likes to always remain discreet. Back at the Adventurers Guild, Alan informs Lees that everyone present is also looking for a way out of this city. Lice heard rumors that the Black Wolf Knights are after a group of 6 who left Loris recently, so they must gather again to come up with a plan to avoid being discovered. That said, a Black Wolf Knight enters the guild and orders the adventurers to stay where they are. Accustomed to being independent from this organization, the guild members challenge the Black Wolf's order, but she ensures that she will execute anyone who doesn't answer her question. So she asks where a group of 6 people who recently left Loris is, but the military organization still lacks more precise information about the wanted ones, such as their race, for example. An adventurer questions what this group caused, and the knight informs that they are rebels whose intention is to plunge the Empire into chaos. Another adventurer makes it clear that wanderers like them don't care about what happens to the Empire, and that they work for money, not threats. Therefore, the Black Wolf offers a hefty reward of 100 gold coins for any information about the whereabouts of the fugitives, even if such information seems trivial. Most of the men in that guild have never seen such a large amount of gold, so the first ones quickly start spilling the beans about strangers who arrived at the closed gate earlier today, pointing to Alan and Lise who were at the back of the tavern, but they had already disappeared by now. Then the knight rushes out of the guild and finds 2 suspects running, so she goes after them. Lise is worried about disobeying the orders of such an influential institution of the Empire, and with every step taken, Alan tries to convince the Princess of Edo, Stella, that this is the best course of action they could take. Speaking of which, he hurries things up by holding the girl in his arms and flying away from there. The knight is distracted by looking up and knocks down a child on the way who cries in pain after hurting his knee. Interestingly, the member of the Black Wolf stops to take care of the boy, and Alan finds it amusing that the kindness of their pursuer was what saved them. Still, Lise thinks it's better for them not to meet the others so as not to risk everyone being caught together. But an explosion from the inn where Noelle and Mylene were forces them to go to the rescue of their friends. Arriving there, the entire establishment had turned into ruins, and atop the debris, Oswald carried the elf and the Amazon, swearing to get back at Alan for what he did to him in the Elfwood. Around the city, chaos and devastation were taking over everything, with demons running rampant and claiming victims at every step. In the midst of this, a child tries to hide from one of the enemies, but the demonic creature finds the boy behind a fallen wall and is about to finish him off until a warrior, speeding through the battlefield and striking targets along the way, hits the monster in front of the child. Afterward, he extends his hand to the little boy and says it's okay. Terrified, Lise notices Curtis trapped under the rubble and rushes to help the lad, but Oswald makes it clear he doesn't want anyone playing the hero because this stage is for him and the kid. As Alan remains calm in the face of the enormous threat, the Black Wolf questions if these people mean anything to him, assuming he wouldn't have any problems executing both right now. Alan then questions what would happen faster in this situation, Oswald killing the two or having his own head separated from his body. This question infuriates the Black Wolf, ready to put his enemy in his place until a blade cuts the man's arm, causing him to fall to the ground in pain. Alan approaches and tells the guy to shut up because he wants his questions answered right now. However, Oswald ignores the pain and begins to laugh, calling the boy an idiot because from the beginning the wolf knew he couldn't defeat Alan. In fact, this whole scene was a distraction for him to launch his explosion at various different targets while Alan was occupied. All it takes is for him to want his victims to go up in smoke, and the reward will be seeing horror on Alan's face. In the Forest of Elves, the boy cut the mana fuses and thwarted Oswald's plans, but this time, the people connected to these energy cables will turn to dust the moment that happens. Faced with this, Alan tries to think of what he can do. Remembering when he tried to save that little boy and ended up being stoned, he concludes he's no longer the hero he used to be. Therefore, he has no obligation to save those he doesn't even know, and he concludes his priority is now different. In the meantime, Oswald triggers the explosions while Alan emanates an aura that covers the entire terrain. Using all his speed, he cuts the fuses again before the enemy's mana arrives, avoiding the explosion once more and saving all the people who would have been victims. Having done this, Oswald doesn't understand what went wrong with his plan, and Alan returns to his opponent and tells him to say his last words. Then the man calls the boy a monster. And as he goes to decapitate Oswald, a warrior intervenes and states she can't let this happen to one of the Black Wolf Knights. She understands that the man destroyed the city and caused all this chaos, and that he deserves punishment, but this punishment must be given by her, ensuring he will be treated properly. After all, she is Celia Bartolis, vice captain of the Black Wolf Knights, and she has a name to uphold while giving her word to the young man. With that said, Alan sheathes his sword to the relief of the officer. Later, back at the inn, Lise leaves her friends resting after treating their wounds. She also points out that the city is no longer blocked, and they could head to the Imperial capital tomorrow morning. However, Alan was worried that they were targets of the Black Wolves and finds it strange they retreated and gave up without saying anything more. To solve this mystery, Lise tries to find out who these knights serve. Considering the Emperor has been executed, maybe this is the work of someone who intends to maintain the Emperor's power. Meanwhile, Celia Bartolis contacts her captain, Lisette Burwald, informing her that the unit in Phoenix has completed the retreat. She then questions why the captain lifted the blockade, as the target has not yet been located. Lisette explains that this was the decision of their superiors, but she can't reveal more than that. Apart from this issue, Celia asks permission to punish a member of the Night Corps, and the captain assumes it's Oswald. Therefore, she says their leader will take care of it personally, as a dog that bites the owner must suffer the consequences. Speaking of which, a sinister shadow envelops Oswald's body, and the warrior was already expecting this, saying he set all this up because the shadow was dawdling and he's not her little dog. With that said, the shadow absorbs the knight into its body. As for Henriette, who is captured by Burwald, she is lodged in a room better than most people will ever have, but still complains. Impatiently, the captain responds that this is better than a cell in the basement, and she prepares to leave. Henriette pesters the woman to help her kill time, but the knight has other things to do. Nevertheless, she promises to get whatever the girl needs. Sharp-witted, Henriette asks for the room key, which is promptly refused, so she settles for some books she tries to remember. At the entrance to the Imperial capital, gate security is extremely tight and only allows those with travel authorization to pass. The group presumes this strictness is due to the Emperor's death, and therefore it may be that Curtis can pass, but the rest need to find another way. Noel asks if it's just about getting this authorization, so Alan evaluates that they consist of an elf and an Amazon, along with the former first princess of Edo, Stella, and a nameless traveler without roots. Therefore, they won't get this authorization in any way. Soon, everyone starts brainstorming ideas and Mylene suggests they invade through the gate. Lies intended to do something less conspicuous, which is digging a very long hole for them to exit after the wall. Analyzing this option, Alan predicts they might end up in a place full of soldiers. Besides that, Noel tries to imagine how many days they would spend digging this hole. Faced with this, Lace feels embarrassed for thinking she had a dumb idea, but Curtis found it brilliant since he knows of a secret tunnel that can be explored, originally built as an emergency escape route for the nobility. Since a large group would find it more difficult to pass through the gate, Curtis announces he'll go without the rest, apologizing for putting everyone at risk. However, Alan responds that rescuing Henriette will require some sacrifices. Soon the team heads towards Curtis's coordinates and finds the secret passage. Alan goes down first, followed by the girls who find the place spooky. Suddenly, Alan notices a threat and asks the girls to step back. A bit further ahead, two black wolf knights walk towards them, forcing Mylene to use her invisibility power to wait for the men to pass. Despite this, the Amazon is exhausted due to recent events, so Noah asks her to take it easy. Due to the presence of soldiers in the tunnel, Alan wonders if Curtis has been discovered and they are now after them, until Lizette Burwald appears with a bow and arrow. Once again, the group turns invisible and the captain shoots an arrow that Alan catches midway to avoid hitting his companions. He asks if the enemy can see them, and she explains that no, but she knows where they are because the Amazon's power makes the user invisible, but even if everyone holds their breath and doesn't move, the knight's hearing can tell her exactly where to shoot. So she shoots again, almost hitting Mylene, although she makes it clear that her intention is not to take the lives of the ladies behind. On the other hand, she would love to settle unfinished business with the boy in the group. With that said, Alan asks the girls to step back, but they insist on staying. He emphasizes that he cannot guarantee their protection while facing the opponent, so they realize that things are getting serious now. With the departure of the others, Burwald unsheathes her sword and wants to know if a signal is needed to start the duel, but the boy says she can do whatever she wants. So she tries to surprise the opponent using surreal speed, which keeps Alan entirely on the defensive, fearing being hit at any moment. As for the girls in the group, they find Curtis and warn him about the attack they suffered from a black wolf knight, so it was a trap. Despite the opponent's speed, Alan questions whether she is avoiding injuring him, since she had several opportunities to hit the target and didn't manage to once. Burwald is irritated by the accusation and returns to the fight, while remembering the clear and direct death threat Henriette made in case the officer did anything against Alan. However, during the duel, the tunnel ceiling begins to collapse, so the captain discovers that this was the plan after all. From afar, the rest of the group sees a large cloud of smoke emerging from the secret tunnel, leaving the girls worried that Alan has been buried alive. On the other hand, Curtis lets out a small smile. However, to everyone's surprise, the boy appears out of nowhere where they were, and Lise gives a relieved hug to her friend, causing jealousy in the other two girls. Outside of the conversation, Curtis seems to act strange, which Alan notices right away despite the boy insisting that there is nothing wrong, and that he is happy that his companion is well. Thus, Alan asks if the boy has any plan to save his sister, and he says no, and that it would be best to rest now to think about it tomorrow. With that said, Alan emits a blue light without explaining the reason before leaving and saying he'll be back. Then he appears in Henriette's room and recognizes the book of hero tales that she has liked so much since her past life. Incredulous, the girl asks what is happening, so Alan jokes that he heard rumors of a redhead with 2 hairpins having executed the emperor. Impatiently, Henriette assumes that the boy teleported, and then asks why he's there since the accusations are false, so she won't be hanged or anything like that and will soon be released. Furthermore, she is the head of the Lindquist family and not just anyone who can be hanged like an indigent. In the worst case scenario, she might lose her title and be exiled. Finally, she becomes shy when asking if Alan cares about her that much, and he responds without hesitation that he does. With that said, Henriette loses the playful expression and gains more serious contours as she asks the boy to leave. After all, she doesn't need him to worry about her, and she doesn't need to be saved by anyone. Without retorting, Alan goes to the door, bids farewell to his friend, and teleports away. Then Henriette lies down on the bed and wonders what she's doing. Returning to the rest of the group, Alan seems distracted in a meeting between the team members, where Curtis draws the boys' attention to say that if they save Henriette, it's possible that their kingdom will be seen as an accomplice to murder since she is accused of involvement in the Emperor's death. If this happens, a war may start, and this must be avoided at all costs. Alan questions if the deal then is to leave the Empire with their tails between their legs and do nothing else, assuming that this is the point where his colleague wants to get. He admits that yes, as frustrating as it may be, but anyway, no member of the group agrees with the idea of leaving the capital without Henriette. Curtis stands up and argues that he understands how everyone feels, especially because that girl means more to him than to anyone present there. And it is exactly for this reason that he decided to take care of everything alone, so he asks for the trust of the others to be able to save his sister. With that said, all the girls turn to Alan, expecting him to decide what should be done in the face of the facts, so the boy gets up and calls his friends to leave.
Meanwhile, even though he has Henriette under control, Curtis can't escape from hearing the various acidic taunts from the mysterious girl who doesn't believe that an incompetent slacker like him could plan a kidnapping like this. However, the boy shows that he's turned the tables in his favor, emanating a dark power that shuts down the prisoner's bravado. According to her, the authority to lead the Black Wolf Knights has always been passed down among the generations of imperial families, but Curtis assures her that he threatened everyone until he gained this power, considering all these bourgeois as arrogant and pathetic, hiding with their tails between their legs in their castles and palaces. With that said, Henriette doesn't understand why she was used as a scapegoat to be blamed for the execution, so the boy reveals that he had to do it to gain his sister's support to become the emperor. By marrying a Lindqvist, he, a mere commoner, could rise to nobility and gain the conditions to assume the throne. In response, Henriette is furious with this idiotic and cliché ambition of the boy, even though he claims he's doing it for her too. After all, if they both rule together, she can get revenge on everyone who oppressed her. Despite the promise, Henriette has no interest in seeking revenge, so she bids farewell to the boy and announces that she's going to catch some sleep. With that, Curtis becomes a bit more restrained in his speech, saying he understands that the girl might be scared by all this talk of marriage, but ultimately he's sure she has a more romantic side within that angry little heart. As the girl ignores this last speech, Curtis allows her to think for some time and leaves Henriette alone. Walking through the castle corridors, the boy encounters Lisette Burwold and asks if she was injured in the collapsed tunnel incident, but she asks him not to worry about it and brings up a more important topic about how Curtis couldn't finish off Alan. Despite this, Curtis reveals that the young man left the Empire, so there's nothing to worry about. Meanwhile, in the protagonist's carriage, Noel can't stand this tense atmosphere among everyone and tries to break the ice during the journey. After taking Henriette away, the team was shaken and Alan believes they have nothing to talk about at the moment. But to avoid returning to the deadly silence, the elf decides to speak up and admits that she would return to the Empire with Alan if he wanted. Interfering in the conversation, Mylene asks if the blacksmith wants to forge the boy's sword, so Noel tries to defend herself as best she can, but she stumbles over her words. Alan tries to ease the situation and mentions that his friend was surely talking about Henriette, so she concludes that yes, because she doesn't think leaving the Empire was the best choice because of that. However, Alan responds that it was Henriette herself who told the group to leave, saying she didn't need any help, so Noel understands that there was nothing they could do right after that to break the tense atmosphere once and for all. Alan asks the coachman to stop at a nice place for them to take a break. Back in her cell, Henriette hears footsteps approaching and declines the food if that's what they came to deliver. However, Lisette came to return something that the young woman forgot. Lamenting that the girl is thrown into this hole, the captain of the Black Wolves leaves the book of heroes' tales that the noblewoman loves so much. As Alan said, she adores this type of content from her past life, and indeed Henriette devoured books like this for a long time. In her old existence, she was criticized for imitating humans in their habits, such as reading, for example. However, she never cared. After all, she only wanted to know about those warriors driven by honor who didn't fight for any reward but to save people and the world they inhabited facing extraordinary obstacles. At the moment, these heroes avoided a great tragedy. Henriette's heart filled with joy, but one thing bothered her: the death of these heroes always happened too early, and although it was the natural law of the human world, she couldn't overcome the fact that they died so young. For this reason, she always did everything to keep Alan alive by guiding his steps as best she could, guiding his path and revealing the enemy's weak points. But none of that worked, and the final fate of this warrior was his premature death just the same. With that in mind, Henriette believes it was better to part ways with the old friend and say goodbye to this world before him. Sometime later, Curtis returns to the prisoner's cell and asks again if she's willing to work with him. However, she never considered for a minute cooperating with the boy, so he makes a point of reminding her that she'll be executed if she maintains this stubborn attitude. Unconcerned with the threat, Henriette responds that they can take her to the gallows, and this behavior makes Curtis back down once again in the face of his sister's unpredictable insanity. Finally, as a way to get back at her actions, Curtis states that he'll hire someone to execute Alan, but the girl doubts that anyone is qualified enough for that. Then he threatens to set fire to the elf forest, but Henriette says her brother will only do that after she bites her tongue. Out of control, Curtis freaks out and punches the girl in the face, asking why she's like this while kicking her body on the ground. After the beating, Henriette Henriette asks if he's feeling better now, so Curtis realizes what he's done and runs out of the cell. Returning to his room, he destroys the furniture while questioning why everything is going wrong. Suddenly, a shadow envelops the boy, who concludes that since Henriette doesn't belong to him, he could take another course of action. In the meantime, Alan's group finishes shopping to stock up the carriage before reaching the kingdom. However, Alan forgot some items and asks Noel and Mylene to go back and fetch them. Irritated, they reluctantly agree, allowing the boy to be alone with Lies, sensing she wanted to talk to him personally. Without denying, Lies affirms they need to go back and rescue Henriette despite potential obstacles, as Alan hinted. Nevertheless, the princess refuses to leave her friend behind and insists on doing something to bring her back. Alan continues to oppose this decision, considering what Henriette herself told him, until the coachman reveals herself as a woman beneath the heavy armor. According to her, when one wants to save someone, rationality isn't necessary. Therefore, Lies must return. Indeed, this was the principle that led Alan and his allies to save this city. Back with Henriette once again, she receives a visit from her brother, who once more invites her to rule the empire with him. However, the boy was acting even stranger, even embracing the girl wildly. Seeing she couldn't win in conversation, he summons shadows from within his own body, strangling Henriette with the aim of killing her and making her solely his. Suddenly, the shadows are cut, freeing the girl, as Alan had turned back to take his friend away. By his side, the night coachman removes her helmet, revealing herself as Celia Bartolus, vice captain of the Black Wolf Knights. Curtis claims the officer betrayed him, but she clarifies she only serves the Victor Empire, and Curtis is a tyrant imposter who framed innocents and harms the population for selfish purposes. With that said, Alan raises his sword to end the matter quickly. On the day Curtis gained his power, he wished to a mysterious being for Henriette to be his alone. Instantly, the being brought the head of the Imperial Majesty itself as a sacrifice to fulfill the young man's wish. Despite being scared, Curtis questions if Henriette will be his if he becomes emperor, so the being promises to give him the power to gain social prestige to reach the throne. After that, Curtis enters a trance state and stabs the mysterious creature, which disappears with the blows received, while the young human is engulfed by the shadows. Because of the power he acquired, Curtis is sure not even Alan can stop him now, but the adventurer mentions that all that power isn't even his. Enraged by the audacity of the enemy, Curtis destroys everything around with all his strength and laughs amidst the destruction. Then he attacks his opponents with the shadows, causing them to cut the shadowy hands with their swords. Henriette insists her brother won't be able to defeat Alan and asks him to stop, but the boy is consumed by rage and can't be persuaded otherwise. Next, he strikes Celia forcefully, nearly piercing her armor's chest. Henriette questions if her brother wants to be an emperor consumed by a demon's power, but the insanity he reached prevents any sensible response. Alan doesn't hesitate and hits the enemy with his weapon, causing him enough damage to momentarily lose his strength. With that, Curtis complains that the adventurer disrupted such a perfect plan, but Alan thinks it's too arrogant to believe this idiotic plan would succeed. After all, he already knew Curtis was behind it all along, but confesses he didn't know what his ultimate goal was. With a gleam in his eyes, Curtis asserts his desire to become emperor, so Alan asks what he has to do with it, considering he was pursued to death, even being just a random foreigner. It was then he understood his enemy doesn't want to be emperor, but wants to possess Henriette for himself, and he was in Curtis's way. Curtis's desire is so intense that he allowed a demon to consume him to achieve it, even at the cost of hurting those he loves most. With nothing to argue, Curtis breaks down in tears, while Celia pulls Henriette away. However, the sound of her brother's crying made her see him as he was in his childhood, and this vision motivated her to comfort him just as she did in the old times. Despite her genuine kindness, Curtis reveals it was all a pretense and claims to have discovered that Henriette's disregard for him is because of this Alan after all. Then, as he grabs Henriette and assures he will dominate the entire empire, his demonic form becomes more and more apparent. He then casts a spell on the enemies that prevents them from moving until Lisette Burwold interferes and cuts the shadowy hands controlling this ability. Henriette questions the reason for the change of sides, and the captain responds that she owes a favor to Alan. Nevertheless, even against all these opponents, Curtis affirms he will emerge victorious, thus evolving his demonic form. However, now that Henriette is distant, Alan no longer needs to hold back, so he easily destroys the rival's first attack and counterattacks with his ultimate end-of-the-world ability called Flash. After that, the hero talks with Curtis within his consciousness, so the opponent questions Alan who he is after all. Alan replies he's just a guy who was expelled from the duchy of a neighboring kingdom, a mere failure. Curtis emphasizes that with this power anything would be possible, even ruling the entire world, but Alan believes that even if he had such ambition, someone capable of overthrowing him would certainly appear at some point. Besides, domination and politics were never his interest. All he wants is to live peacefully. Feeling unjustly treated, Curtis believes he wouldn't have been ridiculed his whole life if he had this power. Alan assures he's not as good as he seems by displaying an illusory bloodstain on his palm. Still, Curtis would love to have control over all that power. With that said, Alan returns to the real world and hears Henriette scolding him for coming back without her permission, while Burwald advises them to leave before things heat up in the kingdom. So Alan prepares to leave until Henriette catches his attention. However, when he turns around, she says it's nothing. Following that, we heard that Curtis Harn's Victor teamed up with a demon to execute the Emperor, but the truth was hidden in the shadows and Henriette was hanged in his place. Thus, the Lindqvist family came to an end. However, that was just a story that Henriette was telling. None of it was real. Later, she asks why Alan saved her, and he explains that when he was kicked out of his parents' house, he thought he would live in peace doing whatever he wanted. In a way, that's what's happening. He saved Henriette because it's what he wanted to accomplish. Because of this, Henriette reflects that Alan is indeed considered a hero by everyone.